those who try to model economics, like mathematics, tak boleh, cannot be done. Think about Kancinomics, which is a metaphor for when the giants fight in the big ugly jungle, the big beast fight, the elephant and the tiger and the crocodiles. Be the smart, nimble, clever little Kancil. So then actually my intellectual curiosity turned to the one question I wanted to answer is there is more to life than finance.
Hi friends, today we're honored to have Sri Azman Mokhtar, who's a dear friend of mine, but also former leadership of Khazanah and Tabung Haji. Azman, thank you so much for gracing our show.
Thank you for having me, Pak Gita.
Azman, you came to planet Earth in January 1961.
Yes,
in
indeed.
Malacca.
Yes, indeed.
Right? Talk a little bit about how you grew up, your parents being teachers and how they shaped you and all that.
Sure. So as Pak Gita said, 1961, I believe, was a good year for various reasons. And I came into the world in the state of Malacca in Malaysia, which is one of the 14 states. Historically, this is probably one of the best known because Malacca had an empire in the 15th, 14th, more like 15th century. And then the age of colonialism actually in this part of the world, you could date it to 1511 when Malacca fell to the Portuguese, which ruled about 600 years. So I come from that state. And of course, the Straits of Malacca is named after Malacca. My parents were teachers. At the time, 61 meant Malaysia as a nation was only 4 years old. We got our independence. In fact, we celebrated our National Day, 31st August 1957. So we were only 4 years. So a young nation. And I came into the world, and my parents were teachers. They were part of a program to become teachers ahead of the independence 57. So it's quite exciting. They were selected from the peninsula at that time. My mother was from the state of Johor, the southern state, and my father was from Malacca. And they went to England, to Kirby, which is just outside, which is within Liverpool. And, would have been exciting. I mean, teaching as a profession, was very important, still is. And so I grew up in a home with both parents who were teachers, a lot of books, a lot of learning. We were not rich, we were not poor either. So I guess we were middle class. And it was in that atmosphere that I grew up in.
Who would have been more influential, your mom or dad?
I would say both in a very complementary way. So my mom, Cikgu Maimunah, was very strict, very old school. And in fact, she went on to specialize in preschool education. Later, she went to university in the UK again. And I think I probably could read apparently quite early along with my siblings. I'm the middle child of 3. Partly because I guess the latest pedagogy was being tried on us. And I'm very grateful for that. So she was very organized, Cikgu Maimunah, very, very old school in that sense. And I'm glad for that. My father, though, and I guess they say opposites attract, he was larger than life by all accounts. In fact, he went on from becoming a teacher. Quite quickly, he became a broadcaster, a writer, even a football commentator. So this is my love for sports, probably came out of that. And in a way, you're blessed that the house was not only full of books, it always had in the background somewhere radio, whether it's Radio Malaysia or Radio Malaya, or indeed BBC World Service or Voice of America. And this was before podcast in that age. And, I was just going through some of his old books, because we just had a family jumble sale, to put it in a nutshell. And included, for example, works by Mokhtar Lubis, some of Bung Karno's old books were so it was in that environment that I alhamdulillah I benefited a lot growing up.
You did rugby, then you debated, then you played chess. Was that on your own initiative or at the urging of your parents?
My journey, if I may, there's a school that I entered, high school essentially. It's called the Malay College Kuala Kangsar, MCKK. So MCKK, the history of this country, in many respects is quite synonymous. The current Prime Minister, Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, is an old boy of our school. In fact, Datuk Sri Anwar is the 10th Prime Minister of Malaysia. We've had 9 Prime Ministers because Dr. Mahathir was Prime Minister twice, right? So of that 9 Prime Ministers, at least 2 and some say 3 were actually from our Malay College. One, of course, Tun Razak, the father, Datuk Sri Najib, and our common friend Tan Sri Nazir, right? So Tun was head boy actually of the school, a very exemplary old boy. And some say our first Prime Minister, Tunku Abdul Rahman, was there briefly. So although his name doesn't always work. So in short, the history has been of the school was also synonymous, but at different stages. So pre-war, for example, the school was very much a school or the college for aristocrats or the royalty, as this kind of institutions were all over the empire, the British Empire. You can find these schools in India and Uganda, and indeed in Malaya. In fact, there's a guy called Macaulay's Minute. Actually, this is part of the whole colonial strategy, I suppose. But post-war, it began to open up gradually. By the time I entered in the 1970s, it was quite democratic. So, not an aristocratic person like myself. You basically had to win a place through national exams.
Wow.
And it was a privilege and also a real eye-opener and highly competitive. I mean, today, many of them, whether in the corporate world, in politics, leadership, but also other schools, no doubt. And one simple way to describe is that there's many activities, but in Malay College, I represented in 3 things, actually. In rugby, which is the prestigious sport. I play at a reasonably high level.
You're built for it.
I'm sorry?
You're built for it.
You double clicked me, I was a bit smaller then. but yeah, you're right. Secondly, in debate, and then in chess, actually. So another way of putting it is that, I basically gave them my body, my mind, and my soul, something like that.
Right. What made you choose those? Because you wanted to be dexterous in diversion?
To be honest, there was no such planning. Like you just went for it, and you kind of gravitated to whatever you were doing, There was, to be honest, less planning, but certainly what the school had was a certain ethos, So in terms of this was literally formative years.
Yeah.
So for us as a boarding school, far away from your home parents, no communication in the 70s at that time, it really shaped. And in fact, I came in 74 and we just had our 50th reunion of that.
Wow.
So these are truly, these are friends for life, so to speak. And I would say a combination of your family, those formative years, and then the journey went on to UK. And this perhaps thematically, Gita, is that nations where there is upward mobility, that institutions popped up at different stages, right? That was, meritocratic and yet developmental, that allowed you to proceed. So I won a scholarship to go to UK to study accountancy, ACCA, so it's a chartered accounting profession, which I did. But I must say, I opened up, I probably spent just as much time, in fact, probably even more, learning the culture, learning about going to the museums, hitchhiking endlessly around Europe. This is in the late 70s, early 80s. And then came back and served what was Lembaga Elektrik Negara, which is like the PLN equivalent in Indonesia, right? The national utility. And so on. And then we'll talk about how from there I pivoted into investment banking, investment research, and then the world of finance.
I want to still pick on your scholastic or academic journey, to what extent would you attribute your ability to put premium on not just economic and financial value, but also societal value to what you've learned in academic institutions? Or was it something that you sort of acquired post going to school?
Sure. Nice question. I guess we are all on a journey, all of us.
Right.
And our journey, in some ways is defined by what our interest in, of course, our circumstances, for example, the practical circumstances of earning a living,
right,
or, the range of options available, right? So frankly, in 1978, when I went to UK, had they say go and study archaeology or anthropology or whatever, I would still have gone because you just want to get out, right? So it was accounting, which is fine, which is a good profession, which I'm grateful to have that, right? But quite quickly when I was there, I said, fine, you eventually pass your accounting exams. But my God, the world, there were so many things out there. So I think more important than this qualification is probably this innate sense of curiosity that you have in you. And somehow this was probably planted from the environment I grew up in, the household. My father, as I said, was a broadcaster, so an extremely gregarious guy. In fact, one anecdote I remember was that in the old days when we balik kampung to go back to the village, which will be 2 or 3 times a year. So typically those in the audience in Malaysia will know you drive down, that time the highways were not there. So would stop to fill up gas, petroleum, Sungai Besi typically, this is where the petrol station was. Sometimes then that time car no aircon, right? So I can remember Cikgu Maimunah was not very happy. My mom, if you're watching this, I remember this, going like that. Because my dad would meet a random stranger at the pump and start talking for 1 hour while the rest of the family was waiting inside. That's Dad. He would strike out a conversation, and this is a wonderful characteristic, right? As they say, to be able to talk to kings and prime ministers and knaves and the most common, and treat them the same. I think this is a nice touch. I hope I honor my father's memory, that he was very much intellectually very curious, but yet he could touch, I think, the important thing. Right? He was a writer. He was a member of Gapena, is this writers kind of movement, which was very much identified with the independence movement and beyond, as a new nation was forming. And at that time, they basically crossed borders, a lot of affiliation with Indonesia and Indonesian intellectuals. But yet, I think the organizational skills, I would say my mom, I picked this up. For example, just a simple anecdote as I think about it. On those same trips, going balik kampung, so our car, several cars, not that many. One was, I think, a Renault, whatever. So all the luggage of the family, no one else can fit it in except my mom. So it's about optimization exercise, right? She was able to arrange in a certain way. Only she was able to do it. Till today, Mom, she's 90. In fact, inshallah, she'll be 91. Right. Mom is always right, and Mom is always right. In this case,
I can say the same
thing. You can say the same
thing.
Okay. So we grew up in that environment. And then, so my academic journey, if you like, was accounting. I kind of did that. And then as the journey went on, there was a period of my life in the late 80s, which involved, our somewhat, what do you call it? Blessed, almost magical existence as a family was kind of rocked towards the late 80s when my late father, after retirement, had a stroke. So he passed away quite young, at 57. So this kind of, for a family that basically not much. Every family will go through their trials. So a period of about 2.5 years after the stroke was quite testing for all of us. And then he passed away. And as it turns out, that was a turning point in the sense that my father had the stroke 1 month before going for Hajj to bring my mother. The good news is that he had gone earlier in 1977 as a guest of Saudi, because as a senior government servant, they get to go. In fact, he even went into the Kaaba, but only alone. My mom didn't go. Okay, so that was a trip post-retirement, I wanted to bring my mom. So being the elder of the two boys, there's three of us, so two boys and a girl, fell on me to bring my mom. So of course, suddenly this young man had to get prepared how to go to Hajj. Okay, so no, what do you call it? Normally people go to Hajj, as you know, Pak Gita.
Wait, yeah.
One, long time. Two, you do Umrah first, and then you go for the big one, right?
Yeah.
So I went into the deep end actually, and this was the Hajj of 1990, and the Hajj of 1990 was, first of all, it's July, so it was like peak summer kind of thing. Second was, this was the year of the Mina tragedy. If you Google,
my relatives were casualties.
There you go.
Yeah.
I mean, Malaysia lost, 2,000 over people. Malaysia lost, I don't know, 100 over. Indonesia would
My
have lost more.
father's younger
There you go.
siblings. Yeah.
And that was actually a turning point in more ways than one, as you can imagine. I went there as a 29-year-old, single bachelor, so I mean, I think I can reveal here that, of course, you go haji, kita berdoa, ya Allah bagilah rezeki and jodoh yang baik, right? So I kid you not, we met, this very nice elderly couple, was like distant from the village in Johor. Within a year, I married their daughter out of the blue. Seriously, this is Alhamdulillah. So
Mas,
as you know, my dear wife was actually practicing as an architect in the US, living there for like 10 years studying. Suddenly she came back, and I don't know, a twist of fate. Within a year, we were married, and then my career just changed. Actually, our kids came, and I left the National Electricity Board and joined UBS. And the twist of fate was also, Tenaga was a relatively sleepy, fair to say, utility. Suddenly became, when it was listed, became the largest company in Malaysia, 30% of the index or thereabouts, and globally significant in the early 90s because Malaysia was about 14-15% of MSCI index, emerging market. So when you're 30% or 15%, that's a lot of percent. Like everybody comes to KL or just to see Tenaga. And I'm the finance guy running investor relations, right? So now everybody in the land of the blind, the one-eyed guy is a king. Okay? So they all think I was an expert, small expert. So UBS hired me, and then my career just kind of took off. And I became head of research UBS, Solomon. This was the boom, go-go years.
Yeah.
And then boom, the bust of 98, right? And 98 actually was even in a very depressing way, in a way, good for me because Solomon was the financial advisors to the government of Malaysia. We were trading distressed assets, not equity was close, right? But we were trading distressed assets and so. So the journey intellectually kind of mirrored the practice journey in the sense that after doing Hajj, I decided I needed to know more about my own religion, which is Islam, of course. Because, you kind of grew up on a technical field like accountancy. But culturally, while I was studying and hitchhiking throughout Europe, we were into art and culture, read the existentialist philosophers sitting down in the left bank in Paris, that kind of thing. And this, Amsterdam, the kind of stuff you do. But yet when you go through that, then I decided, and thankfully, the International Islamic University, Islam, which the current Prime Minister, she started it, was instrumental in 1983. So they were less than 10 years old, but they had a wonderful program called Diploma in Islamic Studies, just basically for people who are, I suppose, quite well educated in the Western side, but needed to know more about the Islamic tradition. The ideas of Professor Syed Naqib Alatas, by the way, who talks about secularism, who talks about Islamization of knowledge, who talks about adab. These are very influential and very formative. And some of that manifests itself in discourse. So I enlisted for this. No one asked me to, because I said there's a gap, I need to know. It's not so much the qualification, it's just that burning desire to know, right? So I did that. And that's like a year, and you would go on a Saturday afternoon after work. That time you work 5.5 days a week. But it was very stimulating because it opened up, you got reading lists and stuff, right? And the gentleman who ran that, a very distinguished scholar who has passed away, I consider him one of my teachers. Later, when I was at Khazanah, I would engage him to think through certain things, certain Sri Kamal Hassan. And interestingly, there was international faculty from the Muslim world. And one of them, later I would call on him in Ankara when he was the Prime Minister of Turkey, Ahmad Davutoglu. Okay, the Prime Minister of Turkey was actually a lecturer in the course.
Wow.
And so I would knock on the door and he would answer me. I said, Assalamualaikum. I said, Waalaikumsalam. Apa kabar? He would start talking in Malay briefly. And this is quite interesting because, Khazanah, we opened up a Turkey shop. We probably deployed about a couple of $1 billion, which grew. And then, of course, currency. But, we didn't lose money, but he was very cute in the sense that he told the Turkish press in Davos, oh, I saw my former student. He's a good student, but he'd be a better student if he invests more money in Turkey. So for the next 3 days, our Istanbul office non-stop. Everybody wanted to sell us their cafe, their kebab store, their, trinket store, all kinds of calls, but it was quite funny. So I learned that. And then when I went into the world of investment research, then I realized there was this thing called CFA, for example. Right. Chartered Financial Analyst, which was a useful qualification, which I built on that. So somehow that desire to learn was still burning. And then, Pak Gita, in 98, of course, the boom and bust, right? So then actually my intellectual curiosity turned to the one question I wanted to answer is there is more to life than finance and economics, okay? So where do I find this answer? So thankfully, after 2-3 years, so that means 97, 98, as a financial advisor, but I was head of research. And this was a very tumultuous period, right? You probably, like dog years, 1 year you probably learned the 3 years equivalent.
Right.
And Malaysia, as you know, went through a path that was considered unorthodox, right? Which worked, by the way. We did not follow IMF World Bank, as you know. Thankfully, we didn't.
Well done.
And as you know, from Korea to Thailand to Indonesia, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, that was one of the things that prompted me. I remember looking at Indonesia, some of the data, I believe about 40 million people in the Republic went below poverty line, above poverty line, and then went below. Now, this is double jeopardy, right? If you've seen what's life like outside the poverty trap, and then to fall down again, my goodness.
Right.
So we saw how throughout the region, a financial crisis became an economic crisis, became a political crisis, became a social crisis. Malaysia contained this somewhat. There's pros and cons, by the way, when you start containing. But by and large, I think it was good because, so we saw all that. However, it really ignited intellectual curiosity. I needed to know more about some of these things. So actually, I gave Solomon a year's notice to say, that's it. September 2000, I'm off. And I applied as a rather elderly
Cambridge.
To Cambridge. I turned 40 at Cambridge. That's positively ancient, as you know, for graduate students. But thankfully, they took me in and then I became like a slightly crazed middle-aged guy. I was supposed to take only four subjects, right? I took like 9. I took exam 4, but I attended like 9. So I was like, riding bike. But consider this, the job I had as head of research, Solomon was one of the, for that age, one of the most interesting, one of the best paid. But I gave all that up with nothing because I just felt a burning thing. I needed to know more. And the clock was ticking, right? So I went, and thankfully, I landed on development studies, majoring on development economics. And my supervisor, at that time relatively unknown, is this, now rather famous Korean professor, Dr. Hajun Chang. So Hajun, I believe he has sold something like 3 million books.
Yeah.
So 3 million books.
I got to meet him because of you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, in any genre, 3 million is a lot of books, let alone in economics. So you could say Hajun was a heterodox, whatever you want to call it, whatever label on it. But, we hit it off. In fact, fast forward many years later, after Khazanah, he invited me back and I became, a distinguished fellow at his center on development at Cambridge. And now I'm actually with him. He has moved to SOAS in London. I'm also a fellow at his center now. And we still collaborate with him. And his ever-expanding coterie of former students, some are in Oxford, in various. So we are now thinking through around, we'll talk about that a bit later about development, about inequality, about impact of technology, impact of finance. So that journey kind of grew. So the idea of a lifelong journey of discovery, but later perhaps we'll talk about ultimately the point of ilmu, knowledge, is to apply, right? And to apply it properly.
And I want to pick up on two things that you raised. The first would have been your exposure to the Islamic University. And in many of your remarks or writings, you would have alluded to the Khalduns of the world, the Batutas of the world. Those are personalities belonging to what I think, a great Islamic age, right? Between the 8th and 13th centuries.
Sure. The so-called golden age.
The 500 years of golden era. I think it was largely because of the high degree of open-mindedness with whatever that was happening, right? Do you sense that we in Southeast Asia are lacking that? Or even to stretch it even more, many Islamic countries are not showing the kind of open-mindedness? That's the first question.
Okay.
The second would have been what your father did, right? He was a great storyteller.
He was.
And then you talk about being grounded a lot. And I sense that I think Southeast Asia is a region that needs to tell its story a lot better to the world. What are your views about these two?
No, I think, Pak Gita, those are extremely interesting and important themes.
Yeah.
You started by sketching the historical perspective of the Islamic Golden Age, roughly 800 till about 1300, the sacking of Baghdad.
1258, yeah.
1258, sacking of Baghdad by the Mongols, right?
Correct.
And where Darul Hikmah, the house of wisdom.
Baitul Hikmah,
and Baitul Hikmah, right? So, where the river was became black with the ink from the books, right? I think contextually, my own thoughts, and I should caveat by saying, look, we are most of all practitioners with, a close affinity towards knowledge and learning. And before I go further, I mean, the COVID period, for example, was actually a period where reading, listening, it does fill up. And history, I found myself again and again gravitating back to history, because history, there's so much you can learn. Of course, history is history, written by historiography is written by winners, etc. But, there's a lot of truth in that. So I think if we take this, it's really our broad sweep of humanity is really between periods of light and periods of darkness.
Right.
As you know, between Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, and Muhammad was a period of about 600 years, 700 years roughly.
570, 632.
Yeah. And often, if you read and understand globally, where was morality, where was conscience, where was practices? Dark, actually. The Arabian Peninsula was particularly dark. Jahiliyah, Zaman Jahiliyah, babies, etc. Right? And then there was this light, this Nur Muhammad, prophet. Even before his prophet was called Alamin, etc. Right? And how did within less than 100 years, basically a backward tribe in a backward region in one corner suddenly became an empire from the Atlantic.
Spain to Pakistan.
Correct. I mean, Morocco at this end, and then Europe. They were knocking on the doors of France, and then all the way. I mean, it was like probably one of the largest, if not the largest empire known then, right? It was, people say, some say the sword. No, it was knowledge, and it was, and what is behind it is character. Character, actually, morality, right? And later, of course, 1258, I think that was lost, partly because ostentation, disunity. What's the term? The babal means what? The ossification that we refuse to be more open to learn knowledge, whereas and of course that golden age we are part of that great suite of humanity, and because first of all, Islam is rahmatul lil alamin. It's far too important. Islam is far too important to be kept for just Muslims. To paraphrase the quote on politics, right? It's far too important to be kept for just politicians. So we carried the tradition from the Greeks, Romans, and to an extent the Indian civilization, and later contact with the Chinese civilization through Silk Road and other trade routes, right? So if we think of this a bit like a baton relay between civilization, but we're all actually one, right? So then during our golden age, the West called it the Dark Ages, right? During this period, you can argue. Then when they call it the Renaissance, was actually taking from me. I'm currently reading a book called Stealing from the Saracens. Have you heard this book? It's about architecture.
Absolutely.
But it's also about the Gothic style, for example, is actually the Saracen style, Arab. So if you go to a place like Venice, a lot of the architecture, because these are the port city, trading routes. So really, it goes from one civilization to another. And I think there are verses in the Quran, Allah Ta'ala says that if you fail, He will select another group of people. Then fast forward to our part of the world, Nusantara, right? The archipelago, Indonesia, Malaysia, and all this before there were nation states. Alhamdulillah, we found that civilization. So this has always been a region where not just ecologically, where the winds meet, right? The trade winds and other winds meet, the monsoon, such that people could, change, dock and go. Of course, we are endowed at the tropics. That means, it was fertile for many reasons. And most of all, the people element, these are where the great civilizations meet in our region.
Right.
China on one side, India, the Arab and the Muslim world later came, and then the colonial powers, which, by the way, Ahmad Davutoglu just now, one of the things he taught me, I remembered, was that he said, Mediterranean was closed because Muslims were controlling. Silk Road was closed. The land road was closed. And therefore, the Europeans had to work harder, starting not a coincidence from one end, the Iberian Peninsula, the Portuguese, Spanish, and then later the Dutch. And the Dutch, by the way, benefited a lot from the diaspora, from the Inquisition, including the Jewish people moved there, right? That's a mistake about me. Anyway, then they went out, and of course, we got colonized for 500-600 years. So we're just coming out of that, and Africa too, and other parts, right? So in that regard, we have that heritage that is very open, very syncretic, right? Very synthesized. And that our great strength is that, as you know, the debate about EU versus what they call it, ASEAN, right? And the argument that
that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, they try to do basically a fiscal currency union without a fiscal union, fail. Oil and water, right? And I think the genius of ASEAN, hopefully is a genius, certainly is very wise, that, how can we grow together, but yet, remain part of the whole and being very open. And I think it's perhaps one of God's endowments, Gita, my little reflection, that had He intended, will be contiguous. This is an archipelago. Right? So that means geographically it is like different. And, the 600 odd million different. So I think this is ASEAN's time, at a time when the great power rivalry is back. I think the spirit of Bandung 55 and all that, right?
Amen. Next year, 75 years.
75 years, right? And so I think those factors come in. And Islam, out of the 600 odd, I don't know, what's the number? Maybe about half.
Islam?
In ASEAN.
250 million.
Well, in Indonesia it's
about 200.
Okay, so it's not quite half, but it's obviously half, a key part. And therefore our Islam, and because it came to this part of the world through some of the scholars, but many of the scholars were also traders.
Right.
So they must have been very good, I don't know, I suppose in current thought, ESG practice or whatever, they behave very well.
Yeah.
And that's why of course, they work with the local community and the feudal hierarchy, etc. So I think we have that capability to show the world how to live in peace, harmony, yet being progressive. Yes, there are some extreme elements that we all have to fight, on all sides. But I think by and large, this is perhaps ASEAN's time.
I've actually, if you take a look at the numbers, in the last 2,000 years,
Yep.
the number of lives lost by way of differences of views or opinions with regards to ethnicity, race, or religion in Southeast Asia, no more than 9 million.
Is that it? Okay.
In the same period in
Yep.
Europe, 190 million.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Right there, it tells you it's empirically
just in Europe.
very safe and stable.
It's just in Europe, right?
Just in Europe. Well, the two
and
wars were about 120 million
Yeah, I'm
people.
afraid the
in a span of 35
European
years.
project was carried into several other continents.
Correct.
So if you start adding up
You add
North
to that
America,
the Napoleonic,
Australia, Africa, etc. No lah, we have many friends in Europe too. But yeah, I think, and perhaps, this relative oasis where the winds meet, called Nusantara and Southeast Asia, ASEAN, is really what it is. So today we are connected to all.
Yeah.
And I think our leaders, I hope, will be, and circumstances will be wise enough to allow us, there shouldn't be, is there such a term, a Bushism, as in you're either with us or against us, and that shouldn't come into play, right? So I think we should remain, in fact, there's that old term, what? Zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality, a bit of a mouthful, ZOPFAN. Perhaps an updated version is, look, in a time of open platforms, how to, the trade-off is really how to maintain certain things. You have to maintain your own security and your own interests. That's what nation states are for. But yet to be open and connected. And I think that the moral compass to that is really how do we create a system that is both progressive but also fair, with ideas like justice, for example, at the heart of it. This is how you work within nations and between nations.
What would it take, though, for Southeast Asians to up-narrate about themselves in the region? Because we're not narrating ourselves as well as perhaps the Indians.
Yeah, my kind of instinctive reaction to that, Gita, would be somehow I'm not that concerned about not telling a good story. Okay. I'm not saying it's not important, but I'm more concerned about let's instead of just narrating, which of course is not the case. Once we do the right things, get it done, it will find its own way.
Okay.
When exactly, I don't know, but eventually it always does, right? But yes, the narration is part of the journey. But I'm less worried about that. I'm more concerned about if we're doing the right things, eventually some say, people would say, oh, perception is everything. I say, no, with respect, truth is everything. Perception is important.
Right.
And then you want to narrow that gap. But sometimes, perception is so far away that it affects your ability to shape that truth, right? The truth that you want. So in that regard, I think Southeast Asia, again, in a nutshell, right? Peace, stability. But underneath that is the kind of legitimacy that our societies need to have, the trust by basically delivering. So we got to fight whatever stuff, whether it's corruption, whether it's, racism, narrowness, right? Because those are the stuff that inhibits the development of a progressive society. Right. I mean, I marvel at the dynamism of places like Indonesia. So during, for example, of course, what you call Krismon, right? Krisis Monetar, that period was a very tumultuous period. And then I was reading one of my field is development economics, right? So they say people start to think about democratic rights when they hit maybe $8,000-9,000 per capita. Indonesia was doing this at 2,000-3,000 already. So clearly the spirit of this is very strong in the Indonesian psyche, and that's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And your path to independence different from ours, right?
Yeah.
And Malaysia, because of the relative mix between it, we had a different project. But now that we are at that stage, I think the fact that it's a nice mix between the democratic aspects and but underlying that openness but yet connectedness is actually the timeless stuff around legitimacy, around fairness, social justice. Without that, there'll be no oxygen in the tank. You and I know that, right? It may be more cyclical, but the secular trend has to have all that. So anyway,
I agree.
Yeah.
Last bit on education. If you take a look at the non-tertiary, we call this PISA, which is a measurement of lingual and STEM proficiency for 15-year-olds. Only 2 countries in Southeast Asia stand out above the global average: Singapore and Vietnam.
Yes, even Malaysia is below now.
Well, Indonesia. Cambodia is number 81 out of 81 countries measured. Indonesia is 69. Malaysia is quite well above that, but
not
Singapore has just toppled China as number 1. Previously, Singapore was number 2. At the tertiary level, if we take a look at the number of Chinese studying at all the universities in the US, all the universities in the UK, they just outnumber disproportionately those that would have come from India, those that would have come from Southeast Asia.
Sure.
And I mean, I'm not, suggesting the US and UK are the only places to go to school, but I think there's some good innovation that could be learned from those places. But what do you think needs to be done so that Southeast Asia will, progressively get much better from an educational standpoint, both at the non-tertiary and tertiary levels?
Yeah, I think the reason it sounds like cliche is because it's true. Obviously, education is a great leveler, and knowledge, science, applied knowledge, ilmu is the one that basically advances you. But let's also put a shout out about education, technology, finance are very powerful levers. But let's not forget the moral conscience of a country and a society. So that's a GPS of where it's heading. And that's actually part of education, or it ought to be. So in my 14 years running Khazanah, and then subsequently since, another 6 years of working in many public bodies and so on, including I'm chairing a couple of universities today. Our technology universities, some big public universities, and on Islamic finance. So I would say getting just PISA scores are very important, and I'm an advocate of looking at that as a metric, but there are also other metrics. I just want to put that out of the way, i.e. the other kind of more holistic things around your moral GPS, so to speak, for absence of a better word. But clearly, this is in many ways the limitation of how far all these ambitions in various plans. For example, in Malaysia, we are currently in a good place, and the numbers are beginning to show it in terms of, for example, semiconductors.
Oh, yeah.
Data centers, right?
You're taking everybody else's lunch.
Well, there's enough lunch for everyone. There's enough lunch for everyone, to be
Different
honest.
parts, yeah.
And for example, semiconductors, it doesn't come just like that. Penang, for example, and around that, there's a famous photo of Andy Grove in black and white, rolled up sleeves, pushing his car that was stuck in a paddy field, black and white. 50 years ago, Intel set up their first plant. So the industrial base and subsequent layers, then Hewlett-Packard came and others came.
NVIDIA.
Well, now we're talking NVIDIA, etc. Infineon, everyone's in, right?
Right.
And Khazanah, we our only wafer fab, thankfully now is very hot, etc. Right? So of course the whole geoeconomics, geopolitics stuff means that we are kind of this in between space, right? But one of the critical parts now is producing enough engineers, enough data scientists, etc. So the university that I chair is the technology university, by the way. University Technology Malaysia, and we are going overdrive as much as we can.
Wow.
We'll see. And in fact, I'm getting help from, we have at least 2 or 3 who are very successful. They are Intel alumni. They work for 30 over years. They are our graduates. I didn't even know. CK Tan, SK Fong.
Wow.
They've done their spin-off companies getting listed. These are now several billion ringgit. So probably a dollar unicorn kind of thing. Testing and beginning to get into design. So he's helping actually. But it's also for his interest, right? To produce engineers. Having said that, certainly more needs to be done, education system, And this is one of our great challenge, and I'm sure Indonesia. I always felt one ASEAN project is actually just like IIT was done in India, right? So Prime Minister Nehru, when India got independence, 47, right?
47.
Poor country, of course, at that time.
Yeah.
Still is in many respects, but at that time, certainly, he had the vision to create IITs, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, this is
That's a hell of a school.
Huge. I mean, there's 5 IITs, right? At least there was 5. I don't know what the latest. I worked and brought one to Penang, actually, in partnership with our guys, right? So ITB in Bandung, for example, and US, of course, Singapore, Nanyang and others, right? So UTM is trying. So I think you need solid engineering schools, for sure. This is what all ages of industrialization teach you, including from the Islamic Golden Age, right?
Sure.
And there is a thing, a word back again to the holistic nature of knowledge. The Islamic Golden Age, the great astronomers or scientists, Ibn Sina, they were also great religious scholars, right? Because
Al-Khwarizmi, Ibn Sina,
all of them, actually,
all these,
because the source of knowledge is all Tawhid lah. It all comes from one source, right? And they practiced it.
Yeah.
And that maybe to segue slightly into AI, right? So the problem, the great possibility of AI is humongous, enormous. The great danger of AI is also humongous. And the differentiator was going to be basically whether your compass is correct or not.
Correct.
And that compass is something I don't think, some will say the singularity moment will come, that this and that. I think there's no AW, there's no artificial wisdom. As you know, now you can get answers for just about anything.
Yeah.
The question is, do you know what question to ask?
Yeah.
It's really the question, right? And that question is really, that's why humanities, philosophy, this kind of thing, I think will still be there, very important. And that is something that at individual level we have to do, certainly at the school level, but collectively as a nation. That's where our institutions of democracy, press, the politics. So as a nation, Malaysia, just like Indonesia, so we try to follow, what's happening, or Thailand, so to the extent how far we can go is actually how those institutions fall into place. So
just to add on AI, I'm happy to come back to this, but it just seems like a narrative that's not getting pushed forth in an adequately multidisciplinary manner. There's a bit of technological hubris because it's being pushed by technologists.
Yeah, in fact, I need to maybe turn the tables a bit because you are at Stanford. You're closer to the valley there.
Yeah.
But as we know, it's not just the valley, right? What's happening in China, what's happening in Europe to an extent, there's regulation, different dynamics. But by and large, yes. I mean, of course, Malaysia, we tend to be like almost developing price takers in that sense of the technology, right? But I think somebody put it well, and first of all, AI in Malaysia at least, of all the public universities, there's about 20. Our university was selected, UTM was selected as the national nexus for artificial intelligence. And also a nexus was created, and we tried to put the elements of multidisciplinary inside.
Right.
For example, it so happens, thankfully, there's a center of Islamic thought, happens to be where Syed Naqi Alatas, our great philosopher, is there. So I'm trying to bring them closer. But of course, that's not the only one. There's others outside the university as well. So I think the as someone put it, I think AI is basically content generator, right? You can but do you know what is just as important, if not more important than content, is context.
Absolutely.
So context setting.
Absolutely.
What is the question to ask? To what end, right? So that part, I don't think you can AI this too much.
Yeah.
Content, yes, extremely powerful. So knowing the difference between content and context, I think, at least I try to think that's a useful frame.
You hit the nail.
Frame, right?
Yeah.
So the context setting is going to be driven by, as I said, thinkers, conscience, but also a kind of an institutional frame. How are you going to get that together? And the institution is, I'm not talking top-down necessarily, not the government. People, there's trust deficit, as you know. Whatever's coming from the center, people don't trust. But it's like this: social media influences. What is the national kind of discussion narrative, and this is where civil society, right? What are the poets saying? What
Absolutely.
are the thinkers saying? What
The
people
moralists,
debating?
the spiritualists, the philosophers,
the artists,
culturalists.
the culturalists, etc.
Absolutely.
And that atmosphere, needs that kind of frame, right? And countries and leaderships who are able to provide that, I think, can go far.
Yeah.
The reverse holds that those who contend, because there's argument, there's polarization, right? And then the framing, right, left and right. Of course, there's a lot of commentary about the push to the right, strong, usually
Sure.
men, in the US, in Hungary, in other
Germany,
countries,
recently.
Germany, etc. Right, and no, you see the numbers in Europe in all the election, but yet the so-called left, with the wokeness part, can also be a problem if this is too much.
I live in a woke state called California.
Absolutely. Well, our youngest, our daughter is doing she graduated, but now doing her master's in Manhattan, in Colombia. In the middle is a hot spot of not just wokeness, but also the whole, whole crisis around thinking and Gaza and so on and so forth, right? So
I'll come back to AI, but I want to fast forward to 2004. You got promoted to be the CEO of Khazanah. You stayed there for 14 years. You spearheaded a bunch of magnificent stuff. You jumped on healthcare. You jumped on telcos. You jumped on the internet. You jumped on financial services. You were visionary on looking at sectors that a lot of people were not, making any attempt to look at. What have you learned from your 14 years at Khazanah?
Right. So thank you, Pak Gita. 2004, as you said, which is 20 years ago.
Right.
In fact, we sit here today on 5th of September. I can tell the date, right? 2 days ago, actually, 3rd September was exactly 30th anniversary of Khazanah. So we just had a very heartfelt event, only limited to current and previous staff. So there was still about 1,000 plus. Khazanah is not very big in terms of number of staff, but very big in terms of its footprint, in Malaysia at least, and to an extent beyond. The Prime Minister is actually not by constitution, but by tradition and by practice, is the chairman of Khazanah. Although we are not a statutory body, we are actually a company under Companies Act, which means one or two interesting situations where Prime Minister as chairman agrees in the Khazanah board meeting, and then he goes back to chair the cabinet meeting, or what that was agreed on electricity tariffs, for example, suddenly becomes something else, which is fine. People say, how can you do that? I said, no, that's fully fine. One is corporate governance, this is national governance. So anyway, so we found a way to, back in 2004, basically when I came in, Khazanah was a fine institution, very steady, but its investment mandate and style was very custodial. So basically, it was a custodian of assets that were formerly, for example, government agencies like in telecommunication or power utility, and then they were corporatized and then subsequently listed. Some of it quasi Thatcher style. But we would keep a lot and then gradually reduce. And then 98 crisis came in, and several companies that were deemed to be strategic to the country, like our highways, the North South Highway under the Renong Group, and other assets went into Khazanah as a form of, on behalf of the country, that is deemed to be strategic. So when I came in, and to link back to the story during the Asian crisis, I think Malaysia, thank goodness, Alhamdulillah, we did well in terms of stabilizing, in terms of putting in, so-called heterodox measures like take capital control, bank consolidation, didn't take IMF money, did all this. But one part that was not quite done was corporate restructuring. That's where I came in. So I was brought in as from investment banking. By that time, I had our own little boutique advisory called Binafike, me and Danny and Zainal, my partners. So we were brought in. So I basically had 4 tasks, very briefly. One, restructure the staff from still not restructured from Asian crisis. We thankfully did practically all of it, except one major one. Malaysia Airlines remains a major challenge, up and down, and this was basically the albatross, if you want to call it that. Yeah. But it's a very important company, very close to my heart in many respects. In fact, a small anecdote: this company is called MAS, so it's my wife. So there was a time, Gita, when people...
How serendipitous.
I know. So there was a time, but just to tell my own journey, there was a time maybe 7-10 years ago when I was still in Khazanah, friends would say, "How's MAS?" I said, wait, we're going to only make a public announcement in about 2 months' time. Thinking, my mind was me. But today, if you ask me, how's MAS, I will, of course, say, oh, she's fine. In fact, as we speak, she's actually in Jakarta right now, ironically.
Enjoying the high-speed rail.
She took the amazing, she said 33 minutes, Bandung, whoosh. Is that what you got? Yeah. Whoosh, okay. Yeah. Amazing. So anyway, so one, restructuring. Two, to transform, which is a bit more different from restructuring. Restructuring means, you will, of course, JP Morgan and Goldman, you know what restructuring is. But transformation means these are companies that were okay, steady, but not particularly exciting. So we had to lift companies like Telecom, as you know. You saw this happen. In fact, you helped us, certain you were advising, right? Tenaga, for example, right? Airports, right? So this transformation program, we took a 10-year program, created, if I may say, well, it's all there for the record. Huge value. Went like 4x, 5x. Companies that were completely underperforming for a long period. But if that wasn't enough, third, the mandate came that, you need to go out of Malaysia. When I started, Khazanah was, first of all, basically single country. Maybe 1% somewhere, isn't it? 1 or 2%.
To 40-something percent, right?
In the end, it became 40-odd%. When the portfolio that grew almost 4 times, with no money coming in, by the way. Wow. This was the other challenge, because they call it a sovereign wealth fund.
Yeah, the wealth needs to be replaced.
Well, technically, sovereign wealth fund usually means 3 things. One, natural resource wealth, usually oil money.
In steady flows.
Which actually goes to, a sister company, or big sister company, Petronas, well managed, I should say. 2 is foreign exchange reserves, well managed. Central bank doesn't come to us. And 3, intergenerational wealth, pension, EPF and others, well managed. But it means we had all these assets that I had to grow, create value, and then monetize, and then watch your asset liability mix. So alhamdulillah, we did all that. We grew it 3.5 to 4x, depending how you count, at an acceptable level of risk. I think, to me, this is what we were able to achieve, me and our colleagues. So the third pillar was really some of the new stuff, getting into healthcare. We opened up in the valley to do tech investment. We opened up China, caught the big wave, including the Alibabas of the world, right? Opened up India, caught the big wave of consumer plays. Thank God, And of course, Indonesia was an early... we were trying to see how we could build regional presence and so on, right? Then also more developmental work. So one of the challenge was the complexity of managing different investment styles. For example, from doing the deals, the corporate finance stuff, right? To how do you develop what became Iskandar in Johor? So from greenfield to brownfield, then you have to figure out, you got to bring in schools, you got to do this and that. So I think I can mention him, Ganan, Datuk Ganan was my head of investments. I said, Ganan, you're going to become from investment banker, property developer, okay? And of course, Ganan always does a great job. He's heading TPG for Asia now, as you know.
Well, yeah.
And all of us had to pick up new skills, right? And that was such a great period. And then now, I like to think that developmental work, or more not just pure financial work, is coming into its own. The stuff that we did holding out on the wafer fab, now the semiconductor boom, I think that is ready, etc. Right? Of course, it's not just that, but because it was there, it produced engineers, it produced scientists. Iskandar now, the current government now is the Johor and Singapore Special Economic Zone coming together. I like to think, regionally, right, with some of our banks in Indonesia and other places, right? So. And then, but finally, actually, so 1, restructuring, 2, transformation, 3, new sectors, new geographies. But 4, actually, and this is quite interesting. developing people became a strategic initiative in itself, not just an enabler. When people do this corporate house charts, right, the strategy house charts, normally people is in the base as an enabler as opposed to a strategic objective. We put it there. Partly it was the vision of Prime Minister Abdullah, later carried on by Prime Minister Najib. But I think more so, I think we felt that, or rather just as much, we felt that this was our duty. And today, if I may say, apart from all those numbers that we created, if you scan Malaysia and beyond Malaysia actually, at least 50, 60, maybe even more major CEOs in various places.
Absolutely.
Now, for example, when President Erdogan decided to become a Turkish wealth fund, Zafir was our guy in,
Sure.
our chief in Istanbul. So Ben, for example, was running China, ran for the Canadians, the Ontario teachers, I think, and Ghana and others. Even the World Bank, we had our one colleague from Africa became the chief economist.
What do you look for when you recruit somebody?
I think, as you know, Gita, so the formula, in fact, if I may, just to complete this.
Well, I want to refer to what you've remarked many times.
Okay.
Aptitude, altitude, and attitude.
Okay.
Put in the context of those three words.
Sure.
For purposes of describing how you search for people.
Well, as you know, first of all, I was about to say, whatever you decide to do, and that deciding to do is also not so easy. This is in the realm of mandate and strategy, right?
Right.
As they say, do the right things right in the right way, if I may. This is my little mantra. So do the right things means your mandate, and sometimes not just you, alignment with your stakeholders. Sure. In the case of Khazanah, right, the government and then government's change, for example, is not so easy. But getting that right, but also I say we serve not the government of the day, we serve the 33 million Malaysians. In fact, more than that, those not born yet, right?
The creation you refer to.
Correct. Okay, that's one. But then the efficiency part is the second, right? But the right way is the ethics and the fairness and the governance and the integrity, right? So therefore, if you think this is the what needs to be done, the modus operandi or the modus vivendi even, then it's really about what kind of the three A's just now. Of course, aptitude, you have those skill sets, you got the right background, right degree, ability to think. Right. But the second part is the second and third part, if anything, is even more important. The attitude and the altitude management, so to speak, means the attitude means, teamwork, the drive, the hunger, the curiosity, the honesty, that kind of stuff. Intangible in many ways. But even more important is the humility. The altitude management is about humility, about gratitude, because my formula broadly is the third part also means how to get lucky. In life, because you and I know, whatever you do, you can probably control only 60, 70%. So how to get lucky is one, do the right things. And sometimes the world is not entirely fair, at least not initially. In the long run, the longest run, it will be fair. But in between, things may not. But certainly that if you don't do the right thing, you have to be, proper, you have to be fair to people, fair to others. Example, I can tell you, and we work on some deals. I was always fascinated, as you know, in Latin, the term caveat emptor, right? Buyers beware. So we do deals all the time. So I was so impressed when I learned the concept of sellers declare. Okay? And I dealt with some, there was, and I should highlight them actually. One of our partners was, Masik is a group in Saudi Arabia, the Al-Subay family. So one day I got a check in Khazanah. I said, what's this check for? I asked my guy, we had some dealings in a building somewhere in Saudi through one, even then not directly, through one of our investments. And then they said, there was a defect in whatever you all bought, here's the refund. No one asked. I said, wow, this is another level, okay? And then when I found out, I said, wow. So honestly, those who dealt with us knew that these Khazanah guys, I tried to inculcate that. These guys can be a pain in terms of negotiation, path, this one. Some say, wow, what do they know, this young guy? But I said no one should ever question us on our integrity and our sense of fair play. Okay, but we are not going to be a pushover. We're going to fight very hard our corner, right? So we must be tough. That means we're robust in what we're doing. We must be savvy, creative enough to create solutions. And for us, a lot of the time, because we define success as three things, right? Financial value, strategic economic value, and the third one actually societal value, including environment and everything. Right. So it's a multiple regression you got to solve. So therefore, all our solutions are by definition not unidimensional. So therefore, they have to be savvy. Like savvy means, holistic and all those stuff, right? Just as you know, can be complex. But that's the beauty. Actually, there's not much competition in that area. Seriously, it's too complex. I mean, it's not easy, but isn't it? But the last part is fair, actually.
Yeah.
So after a while, we discovered that deals came to us, seriously. In places like China, because people say, I want to... So the origination work became, in a way, easier later. Because actually size, we grew it from about 12 billion US to about 40 lah. That 3.5x billion. Of course, the assets were maybe 120, something like that, because we don't own 100%. So we tend to take control position. So we were in Malaysia we were big, but regionally, globally, we were small. And we were definitely out-punching in terms of need. And yet we had to carry all that, but I didn't want to argue too much about getting more funds. I said, it's okay, we do what we can first. And that was great because thankfully we managed to figure out fairly early that the critical path was getting the right people on board. And I was lucky I was able to attract. I was able to attract a very good bunch. But also older people, grey hair, right? The wisdom, because this was a relatively young group.
Yeah.
And today this young group are, 15, 20 years on, as I said, many are holding key positions. And, if anything, that fourth pillar is perhaps if there's going to be a legacy, is there actually. Because that's the one where I say Khazanah means treasure. I always say the real treasures is there actually.
People.
Hopefully. And by the way, when we say nation building, we always say nations building. I'm not just saying this of PR. This is literally what we would do. Want to go to a new country, let's say India or Vietnam. First column, what does this country need? Second column, what are we good at? Where can we think we can add value?
Right.
Third column, okay, what are the issues? What are, opportunities or obstacles? This is literally how this was being thought through. And anyway, so yeah, that was a great experience.
The mandate to go international, how difficult was it to obtain?
To be honest, this came from Prime Minister Abdullah, that felt that Malaysia was at that stage. It's time to go out. I think what we had to contend with was, and rightly so, was to ask, should it be Khazanah or should it be the Malaysian private sector? I think the answer is should be both. So my view was that, maybe this is a good segue, the argument whether the state versus the market, right?
Crowding in or out.
Crowding in or crowding out. So the argument of state versus market, I think is a so-called false binary, right? Shouldn't be one or the other, right? So I've given some of my quasi-academic work is around state and markets. The issue is what makes to crowd in rather than crowd out, and figuring out. For example, Iskandar, maybe the first phase of development, private sector were not willing or able to come in. Certain assets, we come in first and then pass it on. Of course, it's not always as smooth as that, but broadly. And I think many economists, it's actually like that, right? It's actually a mix. Even America, as writers like not just Hajun Chang, in terms of industrial policy, even what Biden was trying to do.
Right.
Mazzucato, Mariana Mazzucato writes about this and others. Right? And indeed, I saw Indonesia's got your own sovereign fund, this and that, and there's always a mix.
Jeff Bezos, he made reference to how decisions would have been made throughout his Amazon days.
Okay.
He said he was lucky to be able to get away with making decisions based on one of two things. The first would have been compromise. For example, if they need to measure the length of a letter, one guy would say 8 feet, the other guy would say 7 feet. Okay, let's just compromise on 7.5. The second method of making decisions would have been driven by what he calls war of attrition. Whoever can argue
Right.
better than the other guys in the room, decision would be based on whatever. In hindsight, he says it's not the right way. So with Blue Origin, which is his new little company,
Yeah.
he wants to
Space.
make decisions based on truth,
Hmm.
in the absence of which he's not going to make any decision. What's your philosophical
Wow.
approach on decision making?
It's interesting.
Yeah.
So this is what the Bezos School of Management. No, it's interesting. No, because
Well, I'll throw in a fourth, which
Okay.
is what Kissinger would have always advocated, which is conjecture. In the absence of the full facts, sometimes
sure,
you just got to
you never
conjecture.
have full facts. Yeah.
Correct.
Well, I think at least the decision-making framework and practice I try to do, first of all, is to somehow create a reasonably open atmosphere, culture to discuss, right? It's important.
Right.
As you and I know, those who can do that, your chances are better. In fact, Pak Gita, we sat on the Axiata board, remember?
Yeah.
And as you know, I was the chairman, but I was also representing major shareholder. Technically, in corporate governance, this is not so healthy. However, I was quite pleased when Minority Shareholder Watchdog Group voted me in as chairman of the year. Because to be voted by the Minority Shareholder Group, who normally resent major shareholder, because we tried to practice being fair. And there were times in our board, Axiata, a regional
Right.
mobile telco company in about 8-9 countries, right? Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. Meetings are a bit long, but partly I encourage discussion,
Sure.
right? And I encourage dissent and different points of view. But this can be chaotic if you don't get me. I mean, the alternative, of course, if all top down, the answer is always somewhere in between. And what makes is really the recipe, right? So in this case, if you come to my room last time, which you did in Khazanah on the 33rd floor, the Petronas Twin Towers, it so happened the building is like that lah. It's a beautiful building, Caesar Pally, Islamic kind of a geometric shape. So the meeting room is where it's like round, like this table. So therefore, I said the most efficient is not to put a square table, put a round table. It's not that we had some, delusional ideas of being Arthur and knights of the round table. No. It's a round table because it's
Sure.
most economically efficient. In the middle of that was a spider phone, like most corporate meeting rooms, that spider phone, speaker phone thing. On top of that, I happen to have, in fact, I have it right here, if I'm allowed to show it here. There's a reason why this here. This was the elephant in the room. So my staff knows this perfectly. And the idea was a bit of an icebreaker. When people came, all kinds of people would visit the CEO of Khazanah, big private equity, masters of the universe. So I said, do you know what that is? Of course, they're very smart guys, right? They say, well, there's an elephant in the room. I said, yeah, but it's the only elephant in the room. And then, cue laughter, break the ice, right? That's not the only one. Then my staff will always know what's the next question when they bring, 100-page PowerPoint deck or whatever it is, which you have no time to read. So as a CEO, as you know, you read faces. You got now I can reveal all these secrets. You get all your assistants, but in the end you have to read faces and read the executive summary. I asked what we're gonna use. Is this a light switch? Sorry, I'm being a bit demonstrative. You know what that is?
A weighing machine.
It's a weighing machine. This is binary. Yes, no. Right?
Yeah.
This is a weighing machine. Example, Axiata board. Should we pay this guy who says they can help us to win this mandate in such and such a country that shall remain unnamed? Gita may remember this. That's a bribe lah. Answer is of course no, you can't. But once you find a way into this country, how much should we pay for this acquisition? 1 billion, 1.2, 900 million? That's a weighing machine. Knowing whether this is a light switch or a weighing, honestly, my staff will know lah. Forgive the illustration, but Understand? So this I try to hold. One, create the, what do you call it? The atmosphere of an open discussion. Of course, bosses can be intimidating, right? Hence, we try to put process. Example, Khazanah is known, we have 7 gates. The last gate is the board. The first gate is actually in January every year. I sit down, we call it a start year review. So I have to cover, we have about 30 odd sectors and geographies. Example, healthcare is one, aviation is one, China is one, right? So 30 of that. So it actually takes up my January, February is basically doing this with the various teams, right? So that's first gate. So we say we're gonna play here, we're gonna go hunting here, and we're gonna avoid this year. 12 months lah. Of course, along the year, something comes up, opportunities or plans change, right? Second gate, I leave it to because there's no way, there's 30 over this one, I can't do it, obviously. You leave it to the bosses, right? The executive directors, many of them. So they go hunting, so Datuk Azman in this area, that kind of thing. The third gate is when they bring out something to me and say, okay, this is where we think based on the strategy, based on this, we've done some filters. And as you know, the ratios are something like if you, for example, China, for each investment you make, typically you review 50. This is the funneling, right? As you know, roughly the ratio. Then by the fourth gate is when I say it, that's when we start paying external advisors, if at all, for due diligence, legal, technical, whatever, and so on, right? So 5, they come back to the committee. Now, at every stage, dissenting views are not just recorded, they're encouraged, including the most junior fellow can write if they don't agree. This is a practice we try to put in, trying to create that open environment. And then trying to figure out, then I think sometimes it can be, is it slow? Yes, it can be a little bit cumbersome, admittedly. But then we understand our business, we're not traders. Before we started investing into technology, we only did maybe 30 to 40 deals a year, right? Once our tech was smaller sizes, right? Maybe I don't know, another 20, 30. But that worked fine. And frankly, if you look at our investment track record, is there? We were hitting about 75 to 80% hit rate. Above 90, you should be in jail, as you know. No one can do above 90.
Why?
Isn't it? I mean, that's why Madoff was probably 95% or whatever it is. Anyway, sorry, now you got me talking.
It's a number of interesting points to, just to raise as observations. The first is, this is very much counter to how a typical GLC is run. How you've been able to democratize opinions and views at all levels, all the way to the lowest. How easy or how difficult would it have been for just the ecosystem to be accepting of that culture?
Yeah. Okay. So to be clear, because some of my guys will hear this and they laugh in case we just stop it there. I mean, I have very strong views.
Sure.
And in the system just now, when it comes in the end, all the views said, but final decision is mine.
Sure.
If I will still decide what goes to the board. It's not by voting by committee. But at the same time, did you know, now you may know, or rather you may have known before, like Gita, because it's our little practice. For a $40 billion US fund, the delegated authority to the CEO to invest on his own, you know was what? 0. Deliberate. In fact, some of my board members, you don't want some delegated. I said, I don't want. Because I figured out that we only do, as I said, 30, 40, later 50, 60 deals a year. Not many. I'd rather we have a group, this one. But what it also meant, frankly, no one else can do that. Including, my board cannot simply bulldoze it through. So, sometimes when you have too much compliance, governor, no one takes charge, actually, to be honest. Then you lose that entrepreneurial drive in an institution, right? Somebody must take ownership. I take ownership fully. And therefore, I take responsibility when things don't go quite right. Of course, the process to get there, that means you get, like in the Bezos speak just now, how the market for truth, how do you arrive at truth? What is truth? I think you have to maximize your chances, right? That's our method, just sharing you, under the bonnet. This is basically what we tried to do. I'm not quite sure exactly what is the process today, but it's basically what we did for many years. And some of that evolved, by the way. We didn't quite, because, you learn, this one doesn't quite work. So you evolve, pivoting a little bit. So how hard or how easy? I think, once you get great people and you encourage the argument, and then, of course, risk assessment, and as I said, complexity was always 3 keys, right? And then, if you ask me, what is it I know now, I did not quite know then when I started. Actually, it's the noise around, internet, social media, public scrutiny. How loud and how noisy.
I've got views about it.
Yeah. Right. Which I didn't fully appreciate because it was still developing in 2004. Sure. But over time, actually, then the antidote to that has to be being truthful, but also building trust.
Yeah.
So we instituted a process called Khazanah Annual Review, which comes out every January, rain or shine, you do it, okay? So I had there 14 years, right? Thankfully for me, the 14 years, 12 were up years. 2 were down years. One was after Lehman, and another one mildly down. So of course, it helps going up.
Sure.
And the Lehman year, of course, everybody was down. The year, but that actually helped that if you do a right practice consistently, then eventually, it will whittle away. It will erode whatever suspicion, this and that, and people begin to accept and trust. Right? Then you have to ask yourself that you don't believe in your own propaganda, so to speak. So you have to have internal mechanisms to check on yourselves. And that's where one of the things is hiring very good people.
Yeah.
And the psychology, Gita, is like when I look around the room with my senior team, these are truly great guys. Individually, many of them. I said, I can't BS any one of them individually, let alone collectively. The famous, the JFK quote, you can fool the people some of the time and all that.
Let me ask you on this. What would help you with cultivating a good BS detector as a leader?
Oh, I don't know. I like to think, I think the Arabic word is kashaf. Kashaf is this instinct, this intuition.
Yeah.
I'm not claiming to have any special powers, but I like to think if you think you're trying to do the right things, in the right way, good intention. Of course, good intention alone not enough, right?
Right.
Then somehow that luck part, I was trying to explain that luck. So when that luck comes, you've been in positions where something tells you, because there's all the stuff in front of you, right?
Yeah.
First, the processes help to hopefully narrow down that, certain things are not supposed to come in, but yet they still come in, right? Then can you detect this and that? As I said, getting the right people around you, that's so key.
Yeah.
And my, I don't know what to say technique, but certainly the practice I thought we did was, as I said, sometimes when we had the strategy retreat, there'll be 100 of your top guys there. So I'm the CEO, so I said I've given my speech, so it's their turn to speak. So I look around the room and my reflection would be, how many of these guys actually need to be here? Okay, this is the frame of thinking. So the idea being, I hope none of them need to be here, but they are here because of something else.
Interesting.
They're here because they want to serve a bigger cause. In this case, our mandate, we want to create 3 types of, what we call building through value. Of course, for our country and for our partners, right? This kind of thing. Many actually took pay cuts to join Khazanah.
Wow.
I mean, not massive, but some massive actually, but eventually, because they wanted to serve. And I know for sure if they leave the following month or the following week, someone will grab them. That's a nice feeling. Of course, retention is not needed. Then because that immediately removes, hopefully, at that time, no politics. Some people just immerse on work. Second, diversity. So because our mandate is very diverse, all the full spectrum from the most hardcore, deal types, iBankers, investment bankers. Of course, some became property developers, but great business builders through M&A, but yet to the other end were hardcore NGO types. Because we did the full spectrum. Then the ability to gel them together to a bigger cause and a bigger culture was really once that happens, I think at least from my humble standpoint, was the minor magic begins to happen, frankly. It just has its own wheels. And in many ways, when I departed from Khazanah, I said, guys, this is the real Khazanah is in you. That culture, wherever you go, until today, we have a very thriving and vibrant alumni, actually.
I want to pick up on that
Yeah.
date. The day you left,
Yes.
after 14 years, you wrote a beautiful letter, which I read.
A
few pages, I think 5 or 6 pages.
Five.
You referred to something, a phrase from the Al-Quran. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think, first of all, 31st July was the day I left. 14 years, 2 months. So slightly abrupt because I was actually in my last term of 3 years. So when 15 years, right? So I was 10 months short. New government had just come in.
Right.
So this was quite a tumultuous, period for Malaysia. I'm very proud of that, actually, because our democracy worked. And I think the thing is now we're trying to find our equilibrium, just like Indonesia, perhaps after Pak Suharto,
Right.
You had a period of several changes, and then you found your equilibrium. Hopefully, inshallah, we're getting there. That's important. So for me, I was already exiting. Actually, I already appointed 2 deputies,
right.
Tengku Azmil and Ahmad Zulkarnain On. And interestingly, Azmil's chairing many things now, and Zul is actually running the even larger fund, EPF. He's managing my pension. Zul, you're listening to this. No, they're great guys. Okay. But of course, institution where I was heading. So I said I needed to write because my staff gave me a most wonderful farewell, very impromptu. In fact, much better than I suppose I have done 15 years, probably nice corporate event, the usual lah. But here they did, everything within 12 hours, KLCC, the thing was covered lah, it went viral and all this, right? So in the end, gave me a bit of time. 1 or 2 days later, I basically wrote, a farewell letter, belatedly, which tried to say a few things, actually. Number one was to remind ourselves, a bit of a scorecard, what was our mandate and how did we do, but also to be honest enough to say, to me, these are the gaps. We got the South Malaysia Airlines. I wish I could have created more entrepreneurs. We saw performance of some of key companies after going great guns, and they were beginning to plateau and taper off in a few areas. And therefore, I reminded them, hey, remember we got this transformation program 2.0, stuff like that, right? The second part was to explain, because it was a noisy period. People were accusing us this and that, which is nonsense. And put for the record, whether we want to believe, which we did on some of our investment. I said, look at the whole portfolio. So I conclude this was during the World Cup, 2018. If this is a football game, I said we would have won 5-1. Yeah, we considered 1 goal, which we did. So we actually made like 100 billion. We lost, about another 10, but net we made about 80 odd billion during my time at least. Right. And all this audited, everything clear. And by the way, frankly, I might as well say it now, later this was immortalized, thankfully not by me, but by $1 billion whale. We did not touch 1 MDB. $1 billion whale, page 41. Alhamdulillah, the author, I don't know him.
I read that book.
Well, page 41, if you go there, because the author, Tom Ra, I don't know him actually. He sent a copy, says, Dear Azman, congratulations, page 41 is for you. You open page 41, that's the bit where we basically told the young man to, jump in the lake, basically. And he was inside, and therefore he needed his own fund. Right. So my friends would read that passage and say, see, if you agreed, why NDB when it happened? I say, if I agreed, Khazanah would have been gone. But anyway, so we went through that. Then the third part was about some messages for the future. I said, you must stick together, you must continue, serve the public, etc., right? That kind of stuff, right? And very grateful. But the start of mandate, I reminded them, somehow it landed on this particular verse, which is a verse in the Holy Quran, Surah An-Nisa, which is the 4th chapter of the Holy Quran, ayat 58 actually. The 58th, verse, which essentially says, Allah Ta'ala, God instructed us to render the trust, the amanah, to the ahli, to those who are qualified, and those who are qualified, the task of those receiving the amanah, the ahli just now, is to berlaku adil, to institute justice. Now, justice, then I went on to interpret, we are investment house. So basically, where you allocate the money. And for us, as a holding company that was in control positions, choosing who sits in which corner office was a key part of our mandate, and indeed in us trying to achieve results that we wanted, right? So amanah, ahli, adil. And my staff knows that, we would actually discuss, but usually during Ramadan, once a year at least we gather. Sometimes, you're not sure whether it is on camera, across the road from where we sit here now is a musalla.
Yeah.
Even in here, actually, we've discussed this. And that's our true north kind of post for this particular name. And if you think about it, actually, if you treat something as an amanah, as a trust, you're just trustees, right?
Right.
In fact, you're a steward rather than a leader. This is a subtle but important distinction. Second, the notion that you must always give the trust to the one who is most qualified. And who is most qualified? Again, the Holy Quran in other places talk about Qawiyul Amin. This is the story of Prophet Moses. Two parts. Qawiyul means kuat, strong, capable. Amin means trustworthy, right? Or in the parlance of Bank Negara or Bank Indonesia, fit and proper, more or less. Isn't it? Or in Surah Yusuf, story of Joseph as the Khazanah chief of Egypt. The verse talks about Hafizul Alim. Hafizul is someone, who are able to protect. Alim means knowledgeable. Alim lah. Yeah, so I really tried to hold this dear. Whatever our limitations, we really tried to do that.
Amazing.
So I think those are not particularly rocket science.
Yeah.
The discipline, or rather the effort is really in trying to be as disciplined as you can, in spite of whatever pressure. And that's a process. So combination of that, and then getting lucky, frankly, the luck also play a role.
Luck is big.
Luck is big. And as you and I know, there's really no coincidences. Luck happens for a reason. And that happens because all the intangible, your belief that I must do things as properly as I can, even though, you feel like, hey, I'm so powerless. You're never powerless. The power of personal agency, and then the power of the collective, right? Yeah. The institution. Put that together, and history of world and history of change management is basically that, right? But Gita is not about, one person. No, it's never about one person, but it does take one or two people who had the gumption and the stubbornness and the belief to do things properly, right? And this is what we need to do, actually. We're not quite in the winter yet. We're in at least I'm in the autumn. I'm 63 now. Now that's why actually I spend a lot of time, and like you, teaching the younger generation.
You're entering the 9th cycle.
Yes.
Talk about the 7-year cycles.
Yes, I think Pak Gita clearly does his homework. so some of my the way I framed this was actually something I learned. I got a theory of 7-year cycles on our leadership journey. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you split our journey, all of us, again, this is not rocket science. Some people earlier, some people later, but it's a frame. And like all frames, it's not the last word on everything, but it's a frame to help us as a tool. So broadly, it says, now I'm in my 9th cycle, or 9th chevron, as we call it, because I'm 63, coming that age, entering 63, 64 to 70 will be the 10th one. So at each stage is about situational, right? So, and this arises from the thinking around as we go through. So the first 7 years, for example, in fact, it started this train of thought started because I asked me and my classmates as young parents 30 years ago, asked about raising children, actually, to a wise guy who's what we call pakar motivasi, who happens to be a senior in my school last time, Datuk Fadilah Kamsa. So he said, so I asked, kongsi lah Datuk, can you share thinking about how to raise children? He said, first 7 years, you must give them love, which makes sense, right? A lot of the problem cases on Netflix or whatever, bad childhood, sorry to say. 7 to 14, discipline. Otherwise, manja, they be spoiled. Not a coincidence lah. For the Muslim, you know that 7 years old, you have to ask your children got to start praying, discipline, time management. 14 to 21, as the kids grow, you must somehow find a zone to be in touch with your children who are now, in fact, they cannot be too mollycoddle, right? They got to go out and discover stuff at the age, right?
Right.
On the other hand, you can't give complete freedom because otherwise they can go astray. Then the pakar motivasi stopped there lah, because to be fair, then we only asked him about raising children. Then I kind of extrapolated from my own journey and those that I was beginning and later heavily mentoring and leading your direct reports. And as Khazanah, in many ways you're not just CEO of Khazanah, you're CEO of CEOs. There's a lot of in many ways you have to. So 21 to 28, first job. So my advice always will be, don't go for the most glamorous, the highest paid. Go where you can grow, where you have good work ethic, that you don't stay out of jail. don't do silly things. Good advice, right? Stay out of jail. Clay Christensen, by the way.
Yep.
This is the Harvard guy.
Yep.
Right? 28 to 35, you got to be good at something, man. It's competitive out there, right? So you got to be the go-to guy at something. I got lucky, as I said, suddenly Tenaga from relative obscurity, largest in the
Capital
Malaysia,
markets,
significantly one of the largest, most important emerging market company at a time when emerging markets are growing, right? So that was my break, frankly. So I'm the go-to guy on Tenaga, man, and utility, etc. 35. Then from there, you become head of research. 35, 42, for me at least, you begin to be like head of research, you supervise others. Then you realize your personal franchise, personal professional excellence takes you only so far. You got to work through others, right? There are certain professions you can continue growing in situ. Writers, for example, scientists.
Right.
You don't have to work with other, you may work with few machines. But for most jobs, that journey, you have to be able to work through others, right? Then I consider 42, 43, 49, prime time one, as I call it, because this is where, by then you have had 20 years experience. You got your proverbial Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours.
10,000 hours. Outliers.
Outliers, right? And then what? And then you hopefully have learned a few things. But I would say
talk about how you felt you were not quite ready for Khazanah at 43 or 44.
Okay, because
or you may not have been ready.
Well, I definitely was not. First of all, as you know, you will never be completely ready.
Yeah.
You and I know that. Sometimes leaders won't show this to the outside world, but everybody has this kind of trepidation. And those who say they don't, maybe there's a few really exceptional ones, but frankly, that one you got other kind of problem.
Correct.
Isn't it?
Correct.
The issue is courage, as you know, it's not absence of fear. Right? Courage is overcoming fear. That's courage, right? As you know, right? So in this case, there was also the situation because the context of Khazanah at that time was just after Asian crisis. So a generation of corporate leaders were wiped out, wiped out. And I felt I was too young for this, but there was no one else. There was a generation, and there were moments in time. Example, is well known in Malaysia, Tan Sri Azmi. He was chairman of Maybank, I think very early, 35 or something like that. Partly because this was the period of Malaysianization, and there was no earlier generation. So sometimes, you're born into a certain age, the post-war generation, they all had different, and sometimes the reverse, right? It was too near, but then it's about near. So in my case, I recognize that. On the other hand, this was my field. Investment, strategy. I just came off Cambridge. Of all the subjects I did somehow I landed on development study. I could have done, international relations or whatever it is. This development economic is really at the intersection of state and markets, having been in investment banking and investment, right? So in a way, it was being prepared for this kind of job. But yet, in recognizing that, okay, there are certain gaps that you try to synthesize and complement with other things. For example, at the board level, the survivors from that culling during the Asian crisis, there were a few of them, very wise, good guys. I can name some of them: Tan Sri Tajuddin, Tan Sri Matno Yusof, very wise. integrity, unquestioned experience, judgment, wisdom, and an ability to mentor some of us. And then we combine them in the boards, etc. And then along the way we grew too. So at that age, actually, your maturity, your temperance is actually not quite there yet. Files are still flying. So I mean, you're human. I mean, you know this. You're in the middle, in the arena, as Roosevelt says, right? You're in the arena. This is the real world, right?
How different would it have been if the Tan Sri Nur Yaakobs of the world would not have been there?
It would have been very different because, yes, this story is, of course, completely incomplete without mentioning Tan Sri Nur Muhammad Yaakob.
Yeah.
Was my boss. Many people thought I knew him a long time. No, I know of him. But I
came back he was a legend in 98.
Well, Tan Sri Nur, as you know, was advisor to Dr. Mahathir even before he was officially advisor because there were several, but he was the key person behind capital controls. The story is told. Selective capital control. He wrote the paper. Of course, he was closely associated Bank Negara, etc. But anyway, so the story for that period of restructuring started before even the Khazanah 2004, it's around about 01, 02. So I just came back from Cambridge, still I decided me and my partners opened our own firm. But Tan Sri Nur will tell this story sometimes, that he said, Azman, I offered him several jobs, to be honest. I did not take up. Not that I was playing hard to get or anything like that. I honestly was trying to reconcile my own conscience that I should only take on a job that I felt I was fit and proper for that job. It doesn't mean you're no good. Doesn't mean you're good. So maybe there's someone else better and your fit is somewhere else. But he will tell the story that when he offered Khazanah, it was at 30,000 feet above Atlantic Ocean. We were going to Washington, D.C. for IMF World Bank meeting, for the spring meeting, back in 2004, actually. It happened quite quickly. So around April or thereabouts. And Tan Sri said, Azman, he popped the question. You said no to do it. I'm offering you now, I'm instructing you to be the CEO of Khazanah. And if you don't agree, you have to jump off the plane now. So this story, not me saying, he says this publicly. But, basically, I shouldn't say no because I recognize it's my skill set at that time. Sure, I have many more things to learn, it's relatively young. But also the situation is a different mandate. It needed lots of energy, by the way. So I was able to bring in people like Ghana, and half of McKinsey Malaysia was basically consultants stopped sending people to see us because Bloomberg ran an article and called me body snatcher. Can you imagine? I love that article. Bloomberg actually ran a story called the body snatcher about whoever came and would snatch and so on. But it was very exciting. It was like a startup. It was a startup in many respects. It was a startup. I mean, frankly, when we look back the first 2-3 years,
you built a great team.
No, we built together, and I'm so, and 2 days ago, the 30th reunion was quite an emotional event because, it is hugs everywhere. And the nice thing is that, how to go through that journey, maintain your integrity, your soul, your relative humility. As you know, we have a practice called Kembara Khazanah. You've heard of this practice, right?
Incognito. You go to the ground.
So the insight was this we are literally in the Twin Towers. Hopefully not every tower, the Petronas Towers. And, our nature of work means, you go everywhere, lots of places, running around, or sometimes gallivanting around. So one day, somehow my thought was, hey, guys, you guys are going New York, Silicon Valley, Dubai, Hong Kong, London. Have you been to Kuala Pilah, Kuala Lipis, Kuala Nerang? Then I realized, bloody hell, I also haven't been to some of these places, okay? Wow, I said, wow, okay. Then somehow got the idea. So there was certain responses. Example, so stressed out, right? Working like a hamster wheel. You know how it is. So we instituted something called Silent Day. Silent Day is a circuit breaker. Once a month, last Friday every month, meetings not allowed. So technically, it's like you do whatever you do. Filing, take your kid to concert, I don't know what, I don't ask. But our guy was so wired to be constantly on the move, right? I began to pick up reports of secret meetings were happening. Then I wrote, hey, it's not supposed to do this. Quite funny, ironic. And then 5 o'clock, official office hours close. 5:01, boom, there'll be meetings. I said, this is not quite working, but at least the idea of putting a circuit breaker. Because you're on this journey, you want the energy. You don't want to curtail that animal spirit, very important, the drive, right? Very un-JLC, you want to put it. But yet, this is got a dark side to it, that you have to be careful. So the bit about going out, so the rule is 1 week. The week is defined as 5 working days. Up to you, could be 6, could be 7, but minimum 5. Most people did 6, maybe. You must go out. That we had 6 themes. So, for example, mystery shopper, one theme. CSR, another theme. National development, another theme. People development. So, whatever you want to do, you go out in teams of 3 or 4. Only take public transport, go incognito. So, I would go starting with me. So, my team with 3-4 people. I'll wear a cap, slippers, this one, and start turning up at our many companies. For example, if it's a team, I will turn up at a power plant or a bank branch or telecom, and then I'll call the CEO and say, "Oi, Zam, kau punya instruction nak buka Unify is a high-speed broadband, hancur lah." The guy. But I said, don't sack the guy, okay? The poor guy. I think your guys are not telling him the right script. You got to groom this guy. So no one got sacked, as far as I know. I'm quite sure. And then with Tan Sri Nazir, with Jay, I would say, Jay, there's this lady in your Chowkit branch, which is in this gritty part of KL. I walked in that day, I asked for New Zealand dollar. So I remember that year because I was going to the Rugby World Cup in Auckland. I needed some New Zealand dollar. I know for sure there's no New Zealand dollar in this gritty branch. But she was very good. She doesn't know who I am.
Wow.
Wearing cap. Maybe she noticed as well. So the further away I go to KL, which is great, people don't know who the hell this guy is. Otherwise, as a boss or as trade minister, if you go, everything be ready, right?
Sure.
You're never going to see the real thing. And
she got you? She got you the Kiwi dollar? Or?
No, she told me, go to Jalan Raja Laut, meet such and such a person.
Pretty good.
So I told Jay. Jay promoted her at some, some management retreat. So after a while, the minor legend goes, oh, CEO of Sri Azman is going to come. Like the Shaolin Temple movie. Actually, the guy just killed, the battle, the fellow killed only 5 people. By the time I reached the emperor, 5,000 people.
Pretty good.
All exaggerated.
Creates insecurity.
Well, it creates this feeling
alert.
that...
They got to be alert.
But most important, this was exactly what I was saying. So, okay, at the end of the day, we had 30 groups, each about 3-4 people. Actually, more than that. About 40 groups, each about 4-5 people. So you're talking about about half the organization. But actually, when you map it out, every single day, on average, there's one highly qualified Khazanah person at all corners of the country mapping things out. And then you roll this up. There was a system that the strategy unit rolled this up, presented to the board, checked by the Prime Minister in the December board meeting. So I would tell, sir, I'm sure you've been briefed, but this is exactly how the diesel subsidy policy turns fishermen into oil traders in Kuala Kedah, in the Thai border. So I actually interview guys, undercover. I go out there.
Wow.
Again, then the Prime Minister will let me, okay. And sir, this is how on the East Coast, we've heard of cloning of mobile phone, right? Of SIM cards. Did you know that fishermen boats can get cloned? The same number got 3 boats. Incursion from wherever. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
But some of this, you also wonder, does it really translate into our mandate, into investment? Some do, some little bit nebulous, granted. But actually, the real benefit is the humility and touching the people. Because we are Khazanah. We're supposed to serve the people. How do you serve your people when you don't even know? You've never been to some of these places. So that was, to me, the big insight. So 14 years I was there, the second 7 of that 14 years, we instituted this. We wrote a book, actually, on this there somewhere. And Alhamdulillah. And actually, this took inspiration from, the likes of Umar Al-Khattab.
Sure.
right? The second caliph, Umar Abdul Aziz, the famous caliph. In the Malay world, Sultan Aliuddin Riwayat Shah famously would go incognito, walk among his people, and others, right?
Well,
and
Buddha.
others. Huh?
Buddha.
Gautama Buddha came out of the palace, right, and walked the streets.
Nobody knew.
So I mean that basically transformed him.
Mm.
So I mean, these were responses to somehow, wasn't just me, you know, collectively. And of course, you get a bell curve. Some will say, wow, that was going, but most people embrace this, including our foreign, you know, people. In fact, the China team said, Tanri, boss, why don't we do Kembara China? I said, I would love to, but you know, let's do this first. We never got around to that. So imagine if you, because as you know, as a leader, one of the biggest problem is the people talk about information asymmetry, right?
Yeah.
All the Nobel laureates, all this, you know, which implies that actually the agency problem, this fellow knows more than me, but actually it's the other way around. It can also, the symmetry is also that you're out of touch. Is what's happening down there. And you know, pollsters get things wrong these days, and partly it's because of that, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, those are some of our practices.
Azman, we've covered a lot. I wanna take you to the next level. Southeast Asia.
Yes.
Right. And I've talked quite a bit in the past about how Southeast Asia has been able to embrace what I call a culture of pragmatism really effectively.
Yes.
By way of which we've been able to be peaceful and stable. But we're lacking in embracing the culture of principles. Right. This is about the culture of perfectionism.
Yes.
How to put food on the table.
Yes.
How to increase the intelligence of the people. How to bring up welfare. How to infuse moral value, social value, all these good attributes, right? And these are actually important attributes for any nation building, right? How do you see Southeast Asia going forward in trying to nurture and cultivate the culture of principles?
Okay. Yes, I think very important and what do you call it? Timely question.
Yeah.
What you have outlined, Pak Gita. We are both, I suppose, Asianites in that sense. At a time when I think, you know, maybe not to overhype it, but certainly many factors, the planets seem to be aligning. And there's quite strong, you know, what do you call it? Tailwinds behind us, maybe less headwinds. In a time where the world, there's a lot of turbulence even in the world.
Right.
And I would even venture to say a lot of darkness. There are some dark spots in the world. Principle of which is the stuff happening, war and conflict and genocide, frankly, in Palestine.
Right.
And Palestine, people say, it's not just Palestine. It is biblical, it is Quranic, and this is really the journey of mankind itself, we believe. I mean, we are not Arabs, right? We are not from that part of the world. But really, you know, and the great Abrahamic faith, there's a reason why Jerusalem and Al-Quds, the Holy Land. But that aside, this is a proxy for the state of morality in the world, actually, to be honest. I had the opportunity to visit as a guest at the UN 10 years ago, to the West Bank, Jerusalem, go in. And then you realize, my God, this is primordial. This is very near. So the world, in a way, is a gauge. They say when Jerusalem is at peace, the world is at peace. So therefore, the world is not at peace, ever, in a way. In a way, hardly ever. Eh? So, okay, I have to use that as a reference because to contextualize.
Let me add one more reference, just to put context. The 190-something countries in the world are spending $2.75 trillion a year on defense.
On defense.
Of which the United States, NATO, and their friends spend about $2.15 trillion a year.
There you go.
The UN, which is the multilateral institution that's supposed to help pacify the world, has an annual budget of only $4 billion US.
There you go.
I mean, right there, you know,
much smaller. Correct.
The hope for peace is.
I mean, there's all this fancy framing around poly-crisis, right? Usually people talk about climate, about inequality.
Right.
But actually, there's a crisis of humanity as well, reflected in wars, genocide, migration, refugee, absence of development. And one of the failures, one of the great successes of the international system post 45, Bretton Woods was new, World Bank, all very good. UN, right? League of Nations and UN, multilateralism, WTO, all these things, breaking up, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, all much reduced, much diminished. Then, of course, subject of China and all that. But I think that says it all. I mean, COVID, one of the many lessons of COVID was that one was the great ingenuity of our species to develop the vaccine to fight. I mean, this incredible
Within
story,
months.
right? Yes, within months. Okay, some the anti-vaxxers may argue, but let's put that aside because the real effect, who knows further down. But we don't, science. Right? But the fact that whole continents, how many people couldn't get the vaccine? That's a failure not of science. That's a failure of humanity.
Right.
And finance, development finance, and failure of multilateralism, right? So to me, that is so stark. And today, the number you quoted between defense budgets and who's behind that, we can all have our views. And the reality of what these multilateral agencies are supposed to do is so stark. So in that context, actually, then we start looking that if there is no multilateralism or some say deglobalization happening, then it fractures into regionalism. So which region then? So when the great power rivalry returns in the form of the West with United States principally, Europe also finding their own way, and then China, and of course India is called a subcontinent for a reason, they're big. But really, and then of course there's Latin America and Africa. It's interesting in itself, developing world, right? But really Southeast Asia as a bloc. Now, are we really a bloc? That, of course, you can question the old things about being an archipelago, standards are different. But by and large, we've been steady going on, right? As you say, we don't, there's no conflict per se. But as you said, a culture, as you put it, principles of excellence, of precision, lacking. You ask how many world-class Southeast Asian companies are there? Really, really world-class. But to be fair, you take top 50, right, around the world, basically it is also in a limited number of countries, right? I used to study this in great detail in research because we were talking about regional champions. We didn't want to say global champions, not yet. So we built IHH, we built this and that, right? We concluded that, so we studied, for example, Brazil had Embraer, state-driven, right?
Sure.
That it is possible to have great companies coming out of countries that are not quite there, in the answer is generally no. But can you have great countries that doesn't have great companies? Hard to see. I mean, the Japanese companies, the Sogo Soshas came out, right? And then the Sonys of the world were usurped by Korean companies. So that whole industrial path we have to understand. So I think Southeast Asia, of course, Singapore has done great for themselves and the region to an extent. Indonesia has enormous potential. I read the book, The Nation in Waiting. It is definitely not waiting anymore.
Yeah.
You've quoted the numbers on what kind. The question is, then how do we build that culture? I think, for me, maybe one way to structure this is one, ultimately, it is the culture of the people that matters. So once I ran, we have this thing called Khazanah Mega Trends Forum. You've spoken at it.
Sure.
It was our flagship kind of event. And one year the topic was geography as destiny, ? So we were basically thinking through spatial economics, thinking through location, thinking through, in this case. So the advocate would say Malaysia, Southeast Asia, because of all those trade wind, blah, 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 right? Malaysia, additionally, or we say, absence of disaster zone, this kind of stuff, right? And then invited a distinguished lunch speaker, George Yeo. So George, very nicely, very wise. Of course, George says, actually, geography is not quite destiny. Geography matters, but it's not quite. Culture is destiny, which I agree, which we all agree, right? Absolutely. So how do we develop this culture? Culture, of course, is this, not abstract, but this big word. It's a big word, right? So I would say, if I were to break that down further, I would say one is a reflection of personal agency. So there must be good people individually first.
Yeah.
Then the units around that build society, family being one.
Yeah.
And this one, if I may say, the strength of the family unit, very important. And because there's all kinds of things going on around the world now. And all the
You're a
wokeness.
beneficiary of that.
Oh, for sure. We all are. And
Inshallah,
then
me.
sometimes this, even if these things fail or break down or there's, leakages, I suppose, in a system thinking kind of way, institutional capacity to fill it up, right? How do you bring in social welfare without becoming a welfare state that is, what starts as ubat, as medicine, can quite quickly become poison, no? In the wrong place, right? That means you over subsidize, so getting that balance right. And then the personal side is, in spite of all that, somehow you still produce people. I mean, I can't help but thinking, I'm from the Malay world, right? Malay world, Nusantara. If you go to kampung-kampung, rumah kampung-kampung in Malaysia, if there is a reading culture, many are, not all, but many are, the Quran, the Tasih is always Tasih Hamka. We consider Bohangka, as our ulama. I mean,
The authorities,
of course, Minang. And I think that's part of culture. So I think then institution, Pak Gita. When we're looking at Indonesia, actually, your evolution, as I said, even though the economic progress was still at maybe $3,000-4,000 US, right, per capita. I don't know what's the number today.
Close to 5,000.
5, right? So even like you were 2,000-3,000, but yet, wow, people were asking for social justice. We marvel at that, right? So Malaysia was going in, but then we worry whether many of us worry whether it's going to be soulless, right? Our friends in Singapore once invited, several times invited to give a talk. And they said, "Oh, Country, you're being very polite." I said, "I'm not being polite. You've done great." Then when they press on, I said, "Well," and it came from the gut and from the heart, actually. I said, "You build a great city, but whether you can build a great civilization is maybe the next step," which I meant that, which is about soul. And as you know, like the student leader in school, if I can take that metaphor to go back to school, is not necessarily the best student, right? It's the student who thinks of others. I'm not saying they don't like that. So I think this is the next stage, because this is what a civilization builds. Are you helping out the guys at the back of the class, or worse, the ones out of the class, or worse, the one who couldn't come to class because they were busy helping their family for economic reason? I've known people like this.
In the absence of top-down imposition of certain political culture, which we would hope for, the bottom-up approach has to depend on not just what's conversed at home, but what's conversed at school, at the office, at the social institutions, at places of worship, at the cafes and whatever. And I tend to think that you brought up social media. I mean, social media, I think, has not done justice to creating or nurturing the right kinds of conversations. And that has affected the political culture that exists in each one of the stuff that I've mentioned. How do we re-engineer that?
I think, I don't know, it may be a bit of a, futile, what do you call it, Sisyphean effort.
Pyrrhic victory.
Pyrrhic is when you win, but actually the Sisyphean is the legend of Sisyphus. They push this.
Kancil Yaakob always talks about this.
The boulder thingy. The reason is, I don't think, maybe it's to go even deeper. So I reflect maybe the bit about what my staff last time will know. I call it the market for truth, quote unquote, my simple way of trying to understand in market terms. I think there is a market for truth, right? People manipulate just like market manipulation is wrong, because you want to create a market that is efficient, right? That is fair, that kind of thing. It's not. We had to deal with, hired guns. We call it toyol. People were hiring all this hired gun. I was offered, we refused to pay, and then they said, you don't pay, we're going to whack you. I said, okay, do your worst. And they did. But believe that, that eventually the truth will come out, right? This is my belief. If you don't believe that, then you probably play the game. Of course, you can suffer in the short run, or even the medium run, right? Long run, no, you won't suffer. You always win if you do things. Right? The question is how long is long is another matter. Okay. So actually, maybe a frame like Gita, as I don't know, which is something I've been reflecting on for about 24 years. if I can go back to the time I was in Cambridge. So remember, I left, a
Kancil.
rather cushy job because the question I wanted to answer was, there is more to life than finance. I saw this happening in the Asian crisis. So thankfully, Cambridge gave me a place. It gave me a place to think, put my thoughts together, learn from some of the best, including Hajun. But one thing Cambridge was, I asked them, what about philosophy? What about, how does this link to sociology? Science? What about religion? Oh, no, we're Cambridge. We don't do religion secular. Yeah. I said, okay, fine. So after graduating that summer, 2001, and by the way, it is a few months before 9/11, by the way, I read the whole summer Umar Chapra's Future of Economics, one of my reference point, an Islamic economist, thinker, Umar Chapra. Books out here. So the books here are basically books I keep on reading or rereading, or some I need to read. Anyway. So Umar Chapra quoted Ibn Khaldun, what became known as his circle of equity, which is basically the summary of the whole, his magnum opus, the Muqaddimah, right? Which is the introduction. It's just the introduction to history. Al-Ibar, right? So anyway, so if I can start with this, right? It starts by saying the sovereign gets his power. Sovereign means the ruler, not necessarily the king, through the rule of law, right? The rule of law, it starts with very secular. The rule of law cannot be made except through the sovereign. Still, there's 8 of this, by the way, the circle moves. Then the sovereign, though, cannot sustain unless he has the backing of the people. It's democracy in many ways, right? The people cannot be sustained unless they have wealth. Economic, remember which president said that is the economy is stupid? Is it Bill Clinton? Which is true. But economy cannot be sustained unless you have development. So you make a difference between wealth and development. That's why in Khazanah, we were known as sovereign. We created a genre called Sovereign Development Fund, which interestingly, Prime Minister Anwar reiterated this. I mean, I didn't do the speech, obviously, 2 days ago. And the terms SDF, Sovereign Development Fund, was actually coined not by us, but by an economist in Paris called Javier Santiso. Javier was the chief economist of OECD, interestingly, the Rich Man's Club, for the Development Center. Later, we became friends. Javier then developed, was basically running Khazanah Europe. And now he has left, and I'm actually on his board now. We're raising our second fund.
Well done.
First fund, 400 million euros. We're raising a second fund of 1 billion already. EIF, European, put 3 tech lah. So Javier really thinking, very thoughtful guy. Sovereign investment fund. So wealth is not enough, but development. And development can only happen when there's justice. Justice. This is very interesting. Justice. Now, justice then is the criterion. The next one is justice is the criterion by which Allah Ta'ala, God, our creator, is going to judge mankind on this world. So that relationship, one is with our creator, we are servant, but between each other, if there is one word only, is justice. How we treat each other is justice, actually. What is justice? Said Naki Alatas, one of our teachers, putting right things, right place, right time, right proportion. That's justice. Knowing what is that is wisdom. You got to figure out that, right? Of course, this is contested all the time. Everybody arguing this is the... Now, then the final loop to complete the circle is, because justice is the criterion by which God judged mankind, the principal role of the sovereign is to institute justice. That's it.
There's an economist who wrote something that's subtly similar, James Robinson. He talked about the Leviathan.
Leviathan, okay.
That puts itself in a balanced position between civil society and the ruler or the leadership, only if there is rule of law. To the extent that there is no proper rule of law, it gets a little
the
too
interesting
despotic.
thing, and as I say, I've been reflecting, and in some ways, because you've been given the power, or rather the responsibility to do things, right? And a big canvas, at least for me it was big, maybe not so big, but called Khazanah, right?
Right.
I've been reflecting on this repeatedly, and then later Tabung Haji. Leviathan, for example, Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, that was the original piece, was, what year was that? Like 16th or 17th century piece. It's actually quite depressing. He basically analyzed and said human beings are brutal, brutish, miserable, blah, blah. Therefore, you need strong central force to put things in order. I think a libertarian would criticize that, right? Because this is like, in a way, if you extend and extrapolate that, this is, fascism, so you can even go that way. Not necessarily the case. I think historian Ferguson, right?
No.
Ferguson wrote about the tower and the square.
Yeah, that's a great
which is
book.
basically a metaphor for a more open system and a more top-down system, right?
Correct.
To me, the answers are in both. I think it's a false binary. You say one or the other. No, it's not. But that's why the circle is actually an interesting metaphor, the circle of equity, because it's all interrelated. Every variable is both a dependent variable and an independent variable. Okay? But I have my own thinking. We can debate this. The conclusion, justice is very important. You must achieve justice in how we treat each other. How you go with God, that's your servant relationship. But how many? Then the real variable is actually people.
Yeah.
If you think about it. Because why? Because everything, science, mathematics, all follow an order, right? A plus B equals to C. That's the formula. Except people.
Yeah.
A plus B, depending on the day, depending whether my football team won or lost, it could be C, it could be D. It depends whether I'm having a good time or I'm having a bad time, I'm having an argument. Why? Because we are capricious, we are human, and that temperance may not be there, Gita.
Right.
We've been given, our species, you and me, all of us, the gift and the burden of free will. No one else has this. Therefore, that variability, that's why those who try to model economics, like mathematics, it cannot be done. That's why behavioral economics is important.
Yeah.
Not a coincidence.
I agree.
Kahneman, who's not an economist per se, as Teller, all these guys are more psychology people, right? And what is psychology after all? It's the science of behavior. What is behavior? It's back to that. Those humanities part. About justice, about things like this, right? So I think, so you and I know actually. So the more, that's why that's that third part, doing things in the right way.
Yeah.
Bringing the soul into that. I think if we can do that, be kind to each other, be tolerant. And Southeast Asia, I think, has that tradition. But you rightly put the finger on the issue. Hey, we got to be more exacting, more precise, more principled, more tak boleh like, boleh lah, lebih kurang, how some people are.
It's just amazing how the young generation likes to talk more about events and people as opposed to ideas. Okay. Whereas in the old days, people were so much more used to talking about ideas. I think we need to be talking more about ideas as opposed to events or people.
We look over our shoulder here in Malaysia, somewhat enviously in a good way, to the intellectual climate in Indonesia. I mean, I support some independent bookstores here in KL. Sometimes I go in there, one or two.
I actually feel like that about Malaysia.
No, honestly. I was just, someone was sending me this WhatsApp feed about, people in Jakarta, I don't know who these are. Man, these guys are reading this, reading that. I said, wow. And then here, of course, there's niches everywhere again. The independent bookstore called Riwayat lah. I love this store. I don't know whether they're watching, but when I go in, sometimes I don't really. You support, like, just buy lots of books, don't care, and give friends, help people. But I think the realm of idea is there. Just that most of the needs. So if you can encourage that thinking culture, that independent thinking culture. So I worry about we all worry about many things. So I think maybe to I don't know how much time we have left, but to round this up, as I said, the power of personal agency, very important. In the end, you and I, we are responsible for ourselves, no one else.
Yeah.
So these people must take charge. Both your accountability and the notion that an individual can make a difference.
Yeah.
Okay? And then I get invited a lot to speak, to younger groups. And I say, guys, verse in the Quran, Allah Ta'ala did not create anything in vain. Everything has a purpose, okay?
Yeah.
I take that to mean everybody has a superpower, okay?
Yeah.
Some people got, gifted with more than one superpower, right? But at least one, right? The tragedy, Gita, as you know, is that for many circumstances don't give them the opportunity to unlock that. Maybe poverty, maybe corruption, maybe bureaucracy, right? And this, the next level, that's personal. Institutional level, we got to clear all that up. Okay? Which is what? The power of the collective. Now, whether that's through a leviathan or through civil society or combination. The fourth estate, whether that's social media or they have a responsibility. I decided to bring some props.
No, that's good.
It's
a great demonstration.
I want to show you some of the books I was referring to. Yeah, as we were just saying, and maybe, although I mentioned it, if you don't mind, I'll just read this actually from the exact copy, as I said, The Future Economy by Umar Chabra. Short passage. Ibn Khaldun's entire model is condensed to substantial extent in the following advice extended to him to the monarch. The strength of the sovereign does not become consummated except by the implementation of the Sharia. When you hear Sharia, we mean rule of law, more or less, an institution. The Sharia cannot be implemented except by a sovereign. The Al-Mulk seems obvious, right? Interrelated. But the sovereign cannot gain strength except through the people. That's where the Kambara story is. You must, among other things, right? You must always be in touch. But the people cannot be sustained except by wealth, al-mal, economy. But wealth cannot be acquired except through development, which is pushing the efficient frontier of the economy. That's why you need to education, things like that, right? But development significantly cannot be attained except through justice. And justice is not just the courts. Justice is in your practice, is your playing field level, is there outward mobility, right? Things like that. But justice, and this is the link between the temporal world and the universal world and the creation. Justice is a criterion, al-mizan, by which God will evaluate mankind. And finally, the sovereign is therefore charged with the responsibility of actualizing justice.
Wow.
And that, of course, at different levels, right? Governments, but if you're running a company, you can understand that. So honestly, in my own little way, this is what I read after graduating for my master's. And somewhere it's been at the back of my mind. I don't refer this all the time. But on and on, I will read that. And then this is actually the book on justice and the nature of man, just written by Saint Naqib Alatas as a reference text, where verse 58 of Surah An-Nisa, Allah commands you deliver the trust to keepers, ahli, worthy of them, and when you judge between people, you judge with justice. Again, justice. So I think the organizing principle between people to people, nations to nations, is justice, actually. Hence, social justice. So now, in my post-Khazanah years, I've been given responsibility. We stabilized, thank God, our Tabung Haji, very important institution. They went through a difficult period, the Royal Commission of Inquiry. Alhamdulillah, at 90 billion portfolio is now at record high, all time, 60 years. Syukur, confidence, trust. There's some structural issues, for example, harsh inflation, not just Malaysia, everyone faces this, Indonesia, the whole ummah, right? But now I'm working a lot on Islamic finance, which I think, because it's our field, finance, but Islamic finance as in ethical finance, as in making sure that we've created in Malaysia, for example, a halal ecosystem, Sharia compliant, but now we're calling that we need to build the next curve, which is about halal to tayyib, actually. This is what we're doing now in my various roles.
On Sharia, banking system, globally speaking, if you take a look at both the assets and the liabilities, most of them are non-riba.
Sorry?
Most of them are non-riba.
Sure.
Right? What's the best way forward?
Okay, I think first of all, if you trace back, and we just finished in Malaysia, but not just Malaysia, we have something called MIFC. It's the Malaysia International Islamic Finance Center.
Yeah.
which has been the umbrella body under Bank Negara or Central Bank, and also Securities Commission to look at development of Islamic finance. As you know, Malaysia is not the largest because countries like Saudi Arabia or Iran, technically asset size is larger, but Malaysia is often cited, like Indonesia is of course big as well.
Well, more Malaysia.
Yeah, but cited as in terms of a complete ecosystem, from education to standards to universities to different investment or rather asset classes. That means banking, sukuk, which is the bonds, to takaful, which is insurance, ar-rahnu, bond, and so on. Right? Is the most complete system, often by not by us. These are independent ranking. So we concluded the last 60 years, for example, you take statistics like banking system, 46% is Sharia compliant. Okay, and soon it's going to be more than half. Largest banks like Maybank is already above half. It's something like 60% already. Then you take the capital markets, about 4 trillion ringgit. About 64-65% is already Islamic. Okay, or most of that sukuk, etc. Right? But the Islamic economy or capital market or capital base is actually more than just debt, because some of the banking is essentially credit relation still, right? Sukuk, still credit relation. But there's debt, there's equity, and then there is social finance, philanthropic capital, zakat, wakaf. So this is the beauty of the system, is that it's all of the above. So we are calling now, going forward, one, we recognize the progress in that curve, it's Sharia compliant, but it must move from beyond form to more substance and spirit, to solve issues around inequality, access, for example. As you know, if you get a Sharia compliant credit card, great. But are you promoting overconsumption? What do you need with the second? Whereas there are certain needs that are still not being met, whether it's education, whether it is energy transition, whether it is about entrepreneurship at the micro SME levels, right? Access to capital is difficult because a for-profit industry for that is more skewed. So among the things, for example, that we promote, we've picked 18 initial impact projects as demonstration projects. One of it, one or two I wanted to highlight. For example, Bank Negara has built a very nice platform during COVID. It started called iTekat. It's blended finance platform that you can bring in elements of for-profit lending, but also Qadul Hasan, which is interest-free loan, zakat money, for example, and then you basically groom and help, because banks are strong in many things, including payment system. They have the resources to do the hand-holding, bring in this and that. So Bank Islam are doing this, Maybank doing that, right? So I'm quite hopeful. We're doing this in a major way. We're working with, for example, Lembaga Zakat Negeri Kedah, where this is our rice bowl paddy farmers. So can you imagine, for 7 decades almost of being an independent nation, there are still paddy farmers who are recipients of zakat, asnaf. They're poor. So we're working with them, we're turning them into zakat payers for the first time after the last 2-3 years. But in the process, we're also fighting existing cartels, actually. This is the Nahi Munkar part, not just Amar Ma'ruf, and so on. So this is all in the report.
You brought up the word inequality a few times.
Yes.
I want to point out a number of economic phenomena with regards to inequality, in the context of inequality of income, inequality of wealth, inequality of opportunities, and also the last bit is centripetality of economic development. Meaning, economic development was supposed to be centrifugal.
Centrifugal.
Right? Going from the center to the periphery.
Right.
But it's actually
sucking it in. Yeah.
Right, from the secondary cities being sucked by the primary cities.
Yeah.
And I want to relate this to how the internet has not helped democratize ideas and economic capital. It has helped in democratizing information, but not necessarily economic capital.
Sure.
And I think this is likely to get amplified by something called AI, which unfortunately is only in the hands of those that
the
are the haves.
Yep.
How do we deal with this?
Yeah, if I can add to that observation, you call it what? Central, what is it?
Centripetality.
Oh, I cannot pronounce this, but
Yeah.
never mind. Centrality. Okay, I got
Yeah.
it. I call it concentration.
Correct.
So there's, I think, in our line of work last time in looking at sector, something called the Herfindahl Index. You remember? It calculates how concentrated sectors are, right? And you can't help but, I've read some article, I can't quote offhand. In many, many sectors, you would have thought that with more and more competition, more and more, what do you call it, democratization, data, blah, blah, it should be more democratized. But the centrifugality, as you call it, but instead it's the other way around, right?
Correct.
Example, if you look at the Herfindahl Index of many industries, concentration, winner takes all, right? Number one, number two, maybe number three can survive. We saw that. Magnificent Seven. Some say about the recovery, they say what? The K recovery. The K recovery is because only certain number of stocks, tech stocks in particular, but the rest are actually going like that. Let's take football. Someone analyzed that the number of teams that win trophies, not that many, because it concentrates on a few teams, a handful of teams. Manila is actually, again, someone, I think a Harvard professor wrote about surveillance.
Yeah. Capitalism.
Capitalism. Right?
Shoshana.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is how do you regulate, that the concentration of tech power in the tech companies. And it's not just about money. Increasingly, as you pointed out, it's about market for truth. About, whose truth is it, right? I mean, look at X, look at what Elon is doing. And you can debate. This is now going into different realm. So, if you accept that the paradox of plenty is supposed to make things flatter, but it's not. It's actually the reverse. Your centrality, the concentration risk.
Correct.
Why is that? I reflect. I don't have the answer, but I reflect that one is actually what is the fuel that drives that? Technology is one. Finance is the other. But most of all, what drives that fuel is the GPS. The GPS is the morality. One. Are you the type that want to share, or are you the type that says, I want more and more and more? Now, the world, after World War II, right, when the Great War in Europe, as you quoted the statistic, and this was like, they call it World War II, but there was the World War I, which is even just as brutal, if not worse. And then earlier, there were all kinds of wars, right? But they said no more war, and hence they created UN, League of Nations, created all the institutions. Now there are all these proxy wars happening, not really my area, but we all know all this geopolitics, right?
Yeah.
But maybe another version of that war is actually happening in the field of the war on economy and the war on technology, the war on culture, right? And those things are again, Having said that, I think the power again of agency, personal agency, individual, societies,
I agree.
And belief. Most of all is belief.
Yeah.
Belief. I think if you have belief, inshallah, it will somehow sustain in spite of whatever all these other forces. And I think that our future of our species and certainly our region, I think rests on that, right?
Yeah.
So at individual level, at institutional level, at national level, and then between nations, Gita. And certainly, podcasts like yours helps to increase that understanding and that linkages. So we all work in our corner, right? Whatever we can do. In fact, the theme of our Islamic finance work, we talk about the process of Islah. Islah is a beautiful word. It means reform, but actually deeper, another subtle meaning is restoration. Islah. And the nice thing about restoration, what it means is that you're restoring to something. Our position, our belief system, is that the world was created perfect, but it's through corruption by the hands of men, mostly men, some women, but mostly men.
Men.
Men, right? We corrupted and ruined this thing. This is our fate, our burden, but also our possibility of glory is actually in restoring, in that restoration, right? Reclaiming the common, so to speak. So then, pointed out to me by a scholar, which I included subsequently in the report, in my presentations at this, it's a verse from Suratul Hud, Prophet Hud, talk about Islah mastata'tu. It says, basically, I want to restore Islah mastata'tu, mean I do what I can, actually, to the extent that my ability. Because a lot of people, maybe we feel, what do you call it? Despair, despondent, right? Helpless. Actually, no. You know, even if you can make a small change, don't care lah. Big, medium.
The power of increments.
The power of it. And then you try to collectivize, right? You do it together. And that's why throughout history, I think whoever they think they no, you don't.
Yeah.
The let them eat cake moment, the Mary and there's always this and that, right? In fact, final one, if I may, you talk about inequality, right? So I read a Stanford professor, The Great Leveler. You know the author? I think is a Stanford professor, Walter Schneidel, something like that.
Okay.
So essentially, is the 3,000 years history of inequality. You know, so in other words, the Great Leveler is how do you re-level society? Not that you want to play God and start leveling up, because the communists tried that, it doesn't work, right? But he said basically, history tells us 4 things that tend to level back society. It's quite depressing. Like the 4 things are the what do you call it? The 4 horsemen of apocalypse. War, can't remember the order, but war, pestilence, like the Great Plague. If you survive the plague, per capita, you do better off. You got more resources. Makes sense, no? So war, pestilence, what do you call it? So disease, war, some kind of societal collapse, usually linked to ecology. That means you overstress. So the work of Jared Diamond, for example.
Yep.
She visited Angkor Wat. What an incredible place.
Natural disasters.
Well, they what made them great was water management. And then somewhere along the way, they lost the balance. And then, of course, there were incursions from the Thais, next door, etc., the empire, right? But another one is revolution, which is man-made. You say it's man-made because the moment it is so unequal. That's why back to finance just now, right? Which is my field. Then you look at debt. Now, the thing about debt when it blows up, and riba for that matter, is compounds. Compounds. So you think about this, right?
It's cancerous.
Environment. Consider this thought. Comparing the environment and finance. Environment, nature has the ability to heal itself. We've seen how, not all the time though, so species loss, for example, that's why once you hit a certain tipping point, that's it. The species is lost. In spite of you can, try to store the DNA and stuff like that, right? But finance, once you do debt, once the genie is out of the bottle, it keeps on compounding and compounding and compounding. So the cure for that, so like for example, rivers can be dead, right? And you can recover, you can bring back to life, actually. During COVID, we saw some of this, right? Singapore, you look at Boat Quay, Clarke Quay, those rivers were terrible, I don't know, 50, 60 years ago.
Looks all right.
Right? Or people can reforest, for example, renature things, right? Because this is the power of the natural systems. That's why that, in many ways, riba is, it is unnatural because it compounds. It eats from other, and that's why the one verse in the Quran says what? Allah declares war on riba. So as you ponder that this is so cancerous, it grows. And so I'm reading this guy called Michael Hudson, not very famous, but Michael Hudson, who's at Harvard I believe as an archaeologist, not anthropologist, not as a economist. Basically, he concluded that the cure to that was what is called debt jubilees. So in the past, from Hammurabi's time, when the ruler basically says society is so unequal that not necessarily, maybe they are, from the love of the people, but because of self-preservation, they know that this has grown so far, this guy's got nothing to lose, they're going to go after me. That's what happened in the French Revolution. Let them eat cake, Marie Antoinette, they all literally lost their heads, right? Now, so consider this. Remember HIPC? High income, poor countries, the debt relief for Africa. Doesn't happen much. So everything is IMF come in, bail out the creditors. Come on. Greece, what happened? So debt has reached certain level that this is not, I think some famous your Harvard colleagues, I think it's Ken Rogoff and others, I think the number is about 90% debt to GDP. The moment, then it becomes sclerosis, very difficult to grow. That's why risk and reward have to come together. That's why equity, venture, for example, like what you're doing, private equity. Of course, not vulture capital, but venture capital. Vulture capital, the structure may be right, instrument may be right, but if the people is wrong, doesn't work either, right? So I think we need to think in those terms. Otherwise, the great leveler, the thing, but I like to think through certain moments in history. Take the Scandinavian example, right?
Yeah.
They somehow got together, reorganized society, the Wallenberg do this and that, and then social welfare system, high taxes, but that was their compromise, move forward. China now doing, their whatever, Deng, I thought Deng is a great transformer. Amazing, right? What Deng did. Of course, Deng came after the failed cultural revolution.
Yeah.
So what Malaysia, Indonesia did, Malaysia, for what it's worth, if there's an Olympic sport for poverty eradication, we'll be on the podium. For all the we moan and groan here and there, no, alhamdulillah, to recognize that. But of course, that's not enough. We want to be more. We want to remove all this nonsense in between, right? We can't do that. Indonesia is such a great, possibility, Pak Gita.
You know, the power of increments. I tell people power of increments.
Increment, yes.
1.0 to the power of 365 is equal to 1. But 1.01 to the power of 365 is equal to 37.7.
Amazing.
So that 0.01 matters.
Wow.
In a good way or in a bad way?
So what you've done is you've applied the magic or the evil, depending on how you compounding.
Well,
can be so what?
Well, Narga that talks about incrementalism is Tolstoy,
right?
In War and Peace,
okay.
He talks about what it takes to be great by being simple, good, and smart.
There you go.
But the power of increments.
Yes.
Azman, I've taken up so much time.
No, thank you.
Last question.
Yes.
Kancil.
Kancil.
The deer.
The deer.
In the context of this Thucydides trap that's happening between China and the US, what does Southeast Asia have to do?
Very interesting. Yeah, I actually wanted to say this earlier in the podcast. I'm glad you raised it because I'm on record now because 2 days ago at the Khazanah 30th anniversary, I sketched out, they gave me the floor along with the former MDs. I sketched out 3 kind of formula, if I can call it that. The first one, maybe for this audience and others, to repeat that, I said 33 times 33. Second one, K times K. And the third one, I reserved to the end. 33 times 33 for me was that Malaysia just turned 67. Forget what Khazanah, the last 30 years, enough lah, patting ourselves on the back. More important, look at the next 33 because in 33 years' time, Malaysia will be 100 lah. Kind of a milestone. But the 33 was the 33 million Malaysians lah. We're smaller, but for me, this is just one number, important number, and those not born yet, right? The K times K is where I want to. K was of course Khazanah lah. The second K, I said, Kancil nomics. Think about Kancil nomics, which is a metaphor for when the giants fight in the big ugly jungle, the big beast fight, the elephant and the tiger and the crocodiles, be the smart, nimble, clever little Kancil. We don't make unfairly from others. We have to recognize we are not that big, at least Malaysia. Indonesia, of course, is larger, but ASEAN in the world, maybe it's a metaphor to be nimble now. As you know, in our folklore, and I think in Indonesia too, right? How does the Kancil cross the river, right? It does that when there's lots of crocodile by finding a way to jump on the heads of the crocodile to cross. We grew up on this, right? How does when the elephant fight with this, somehow they do alliance with the monkeys to come and change the game. I was born in Malacca as you started this podcast. Malacca, the origin story of Malacca, legend or otherwise, is when Parameswara, the Sumatran prince, came over, sat down under the Malacca tree, and then he observed about this little being called the mouse deer. fighting this big dog, but this guy won, feisty, right? Like that. So we got to be that Kancil. And I think so that's the metaphor, the Kancil. Of course, the Kancil got to be lean, got to be healthy, got to be smart, blah, 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 all these things. And I think we can. And small nations, by definition, are not big nations. Big nations are big, so they have certain advantages, but they also have certain burdens, right? In fact, there's a whole group of nations that are successful small nations. I mean, take Denmark, take Switzerland,
right.
Take Latvia, take New Zealand, for example, or Singapore, for that matter. But there's also, middle powers and large powers. So knowing your place, our place. So I think this is where our time comes. And to complete, my third formula was actually finding your true north, your Qiblat, which we covered quite a lot already. Then execution. So, one of my popular quotes last time when I was at Khazanah was, my colleagues will remember this, execute-lah kamu sebelum kamu di-executekan. So this is about precision, about your point about power of precision principles, right? Excellent, right?
And your 5-minute rule.
Oh, the 5-minute rule is about integrity, which is the third part. The third part. So, true north plus execution multiply by, I put it as how to get lucky. You get lucky by being true, right? One of the ways to be true is this 5-minute rule, which means the only way we could work was to be 5 minutes away from either getting sacked or resigning on matter principle. As it turns out, paradoxically, you survive 14 years. If I may riff on that a little bit, you follow rugby, So the New Zealand All Blacks are legendary, right? So they are famous haka, right? And the haka, and of course we claim they're actually from the Malay world, Jonah Lomu, all this, they roll all the way to the South Seas. Goes, ku mate, ke ora, ke ora. Ku mate means aku mati, yeah?
It came from us.
Came from our. By the way, this is the Melanesian language. So ku mate, aku mati, ke ora, aku hidup. What it means is to live, you got to die first. This is the warrior mentality, right? Pak Gita, I mean, you know this in our culture, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we forget. Our great warriors, in Indonesia, of course, land of warriors, many warriors. Malay world too, Sometimes we don't enough. So the present day warriors must have that warrior mentality.
Yeah.
You serve, you die. So to get lucky means and be fair. Back to justice, You be fair means you be reasonable. You give right proportion. It's about giving right proportion. You declare if your design is defect, you declare. Imagine. So then you get lucky, right? You somehow get lucky somewhere. I mean, the world is unfair place, true. But there are still pockets of, not just pockets, there's ways and ways of good things. And this is the power, and I think our world, our part of the world, alhamdulillah, our ancestors, Nusantara, right? Islam came to this part of the world, but also, I've been to Prambanan, I've been to Borobudur, there's now
Buddhism.
This is a great region. My ancestry half Bugis, the other half is Chinese, my mother's side. This part of the world, people come from all over. It's a melange, and let this be the meeting place.
Yeah,
and the place where that meeting can become, glorious in a good way, in a civilizational way.
I think a lot of people don't realize that Southeast Asians, they've been able to show tremendous agency and ability to embrace multipolarity. For the last 2,000 years. That's a bit underestimated.
Absolutely. I mean, for us, that ambiguity, managing ambiguity is natural, no? Why? Because our part of the world has always been doing that. As you say, it's in the DNA. It's literally in the water and in the blood.
Just got to sharpen it a little bit more.
The problem, as you rightly put, certain things we don't seem to be serious enough. Okay, let's get serious. You want to really do this seriously. That's the execution part just now, right? Precision, excellence, PISA scores, and those kind of stuff. Right? Want to do it properly. Okay, and do it at scale, repeatability, right? Repeatedly. I think that's where the power institution. But the family unit, I think, very important, right? The family unit. Unfortunately, there's a lot of social ills, there's problems here and there. So if we frame that way, then let's all do whatever we can in our own little corner, and then let it multiply in a good way.
Amen. Man, I got lots more, but we're out of time.
Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Azman.
Thank you for coming all the way to this corner of
It's a pleasure.
Kajang.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Friends, that was Tan Sri Azman Mokhtar. Thank you.
Inilah Endgame.